What's up, guys? Welcome to Revenger. What if we've got something special today? What if Naruto was the Long Night Prophecy child and his Rasengan destroyed the Night King in one strike? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Crater and the Crow. The wolves heard it first. All 6 of them, Ghost, the dire wolves in their pens, even the half-feral ones that had never taken to human company, snapped their heads toward the southern sky at the same moment, ears flat, a sound building in their throats that wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite a whine. It was something older than either. Something that made the stable hands back away from their posts without quite knowing why. Then the light came. It punched through the cloud cover like a spear thrown by something enormous and completely indifferent to the concept of subtlety. Not lightning. Lightning was quick, apologetic, gone before you'd properly registered it. This was sustained. A column of gold and blue-white that poured downward from a tear in the clouds and hit the field 300 yards south of Winterfell's main gate with a sound like the world clearing its throat. The ground shook. Not violently, not the rolling terror of an earthquake, but a single firm impact, like a giant had set something down. The snow that had been settled on every surface within 200 yards leapt straight up and then fell back in a curtain of white. Every torch on the outer walls guttered sideways. 2 guards fell off their posts, not from the impact but from sheer fright, and a third dropped his spear and didn't bother picking it up. Jon Snow was at the top of the eastern watchtower when it happened, going over patrol rotations with Tormund, which meant he had the best possible view of the crater that appeared in the south field like a punctuation mark from the gods. Tormund looked at it for a long moment. The snow was still settling. A faint shimmer of heat rose from the impact point, visible even at this distance, warping the cold air above it. That, Tormund said, is either very good or very bad. Everything north of the wall is very good or very bad, Jon said, already moving for the stairs. This is south of the wall. Then it's new. He took the stairs 3 at a time, Ghost falling into step behind him before he'd even hit the bottom landing, the direwolf's red eyes fixed on the southern field with an expression that Jon had learned to read over years of close company. Ghost wasn't afraid. Ghost was interested, which was somehow more unsettling. The gates were already drawing a crowd, soldiers, wildlings, servants who had no business being near the walls but were there anyway because human beings are constitutionally incapable of ignoring something that dramatic. Jon pushed through them, Tormund at his shoulder, Ghost cutting a path through the crowd with the sheer social authority of being a direwolf, and emerged onto the field just as Sansa arrived from the opposite direction, her cloak snapping in the residual wind, Brienne of Tarth 2 steps behind her with a hand on her sword. "Did you see it?" Sansa asked. "Hard to miss," Jon said. They approached together. The crater was maybe 30 feet across, not deep, more like the earth had simply decided to yield at this particular point, a shallow bowl of scorched ground and upturned snow. The grass underneath, what little there was in a Winterfell winter, had been flash-burned black in a perfect circle. At the center of the crater, face down in the dirt, was a boy. Or something shaped like a boy. The figure was human in proportion, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, no visible wings or scales or other items of immediate concern, but the jacket he was wearing was a color that had absolutely no business existing in the north. Orange. Violent, aggressive, eye-watering orange, the kind of orange that suggested its wearer had never once in their life considered the tactical advantages of not being immediately visible from the top of a watchtower. Jon drew his sword. Ghost sat down. "Ghost," Jon said. The direwolf looked at him with an expression of profound calm and stayed exactly where he was. Tormund walked to the edge of the crater and peered down at the figure. "He's breathing." "That's not necessarily reassuring," Brienne said. "It's a little reassuring," Tormund said. Sansa studied the scene with the careful, assessing eyes she developed over years of surviving people who wanted her dead or compliant or both. "His clothes are strange," she said. "The cut of them. Nothing I've seen from any of the free cities. Nothing from Essos at all." She paused. "He fell from the sky." "We all saw that," Jon said. I'm saying it wasn't a catapult. It wasn't a siege weapon. Something brought him here. Through the air. And he survived it. She looked at Jon. That's worth knowing before we put a sword in him. Jon didn't sheath the sword, but he moved down into the crater. Tormund followed. Up close, the figure was young, maybe 17, maybe a little older, and despite having just fallen from what appeared to be the sky itself, seemed entirely uninjured. No blood. No visible wounds. The only remarkable thing, beyond the orange jacket and the fact of his existence, was the mark on the back of his left hand, a spiral, burned or tattooed there in a deep, dark ink that seemed to shift slightly in the peripheral vision, like it was never quite staying still. Jon crouched down. The boy's face was turned slightly to the side, and even unconscious he managed to look somehow cheerful, which Jon found deeply suspicious. "Hey," Jon said. "Nothing." "Hey." He prodded the boy's shoulder with 2 fingers. The boy made a sound. Not a groan of pain, more like the sound of someone being told their nap was over before they were ready for it to be over. He shifted, and for a moment the mark on his hand blazed gold so bright that Tormund flinched back, and then it faded, and the boy pushed himself up onto his hands and knees and then slowly, experimentally, onto his feet. He was taller than Jon had expected. Not towering, but solidly built, with sun-blonde hair and a face full of whisker-like marks across his cheeks, 3 on each side, dark against his skin, like old scars worn so long they'd become features. His eyes, when he opened them, were a blue that had nothing to do with the cold. It was the blue of something warm. Sunlight through shallow water. He looked at Jon. He looked at the crater. He looked at the assembled crowd of soldiers and wildlings at the field's edge. He looked at Ghost, who was watching him with steady crimson eyes. Then he looked up at the sky, where the clouds had already closed over the tear that had dropped him here, and his expression moved through confusion, calculation, something that might have been grief very quickly controlled, and then settled on a rueful, crooked smile. "Karama," he said, to apparently no one, "you absolute idiot." His voice was warm. That was the first thing Jon registered about it. It was warm the way a fire is warm, the kind of warmth that radiates outward without being asked to. He spoke in a language Jon didn't recognize, except that he understood every word of it perfectly, which was its own kind of unsettling. "Where am I?" the boy asked. He was looking at Jon now with a direct, uncomplicated gaze that Jon found he had no idea what to do with. Most people, when faced with Jon Snow in full armor with a sword in his hand, managed at least a flicker of wariness. This boy looked at him the way you looked at someone you just bumped into at a market. "Winterfell," Jon said. "Or close to it." "Winterfell," the boy repeated, tasting the word. "Which kingdom? Which country?" "The North. Westeros." The boy's brow furrowed. "I don't know where that is." "Where are you from?" Tormund asked. "A place called Konoha. The land of fire." He looked around again at the gray sky, the snow, the bare-branched trees on the horizon. Clearly not there anymore. Tormund scratched his beard. He said, "Land of fire," and ended up here. The gods have a sense of humor. "I'm Naruto," the boy said, and he said it the way you state a fact that you expect to be useful, not a request for recognition, just information being offered. "Naruto Uzumaki." He looked at Jon's sword. "You going to put that away, or should I stand still a little longer while you decide?" Jon put it away. Not because he'd made a decision, exactly, but because something about the boy's complete lack of threat response made keeping the sword out feel more embarrassing than cautious. "Jon Snow," he said. Naruto nodded, like that meant something to him even though it clearly didn't. Then he sniffed the air and turned a hopeful expression toward the castle. "Is there any chance you have ramen?" They brought him inside because Sansa decided they should, and when Sansa Stark decided something in her own castle, it tended to happen regardless of anyone's reservations. She had him housed in one of the guest rooms in the main keep, not a cell, not the dungeon, but a real room with a fire and a bed and guards posted outside who were there as much for his protection as anyone else's, she told Jon, which Jon translated as both. He ate everything they put in front of him. Not ravenously, not like a starving man, but with the enthusiastic focus of someone who genuinely loved food and was making the best of the fact that it wasn't ramen. He asked questions between bites, about the north, about the wall, about the army of the dead that Sansa mentioned with the careful, controlled tone she used when discussing things that terrified her. He listened in a way that Jon had rarely seen, not the polite performance of listening, but actual attention, the kind where you could see the information landing and being sorted. When Sansa told him about the Night King, about the White Walkers, about the long night that was coming south like a tide, Naruto stopped eating for a moment. He looked at the fire. Something moved behind his eyes that was older than his face. How long? He asked. Weeks, Sansa said. Maybe less. He looked back at his food and picked up his fork. Okay, he said. Okay. Sansa's composure showed its first small crack. Okay, is your response to the end of the world? I've done the end of the world before, Naruto said, completely seriously. It's not as final as it sounds. He looked up and saw her expression. I'm not being dismissive. I mean it genuinely, I'm in. Whatever's happening here, whatever you need, I'm in. He paused. I just also need to finish eating because I haven't had food in what feels like 2 days and I'm going to be significantly less useful on an empty stomach. Sansa stared at him for a moment, then looked at Jon, who shrugged with an expression that said I have no idea what to make of this either, but he doesn't appear to be lying. Eat, she said. We'll talk after. After meant the war room, and the war room meant Jon, Sansa, Davos, Tormund, and a handful of the Northern Lords who had heard about the boy from the sky and were dealing with it in the varied ways that Northern Lords dealt with things, Lyanna Mormont with sharp, measuring eyes, Lord Glover with barely concealed hostility, and 2 others who couldn't decide whether to be awed or offended and were cycling between both. Naruto came in and looked at the map on the table, the great map of Westeros with its markers and its pins and the advancing line of blue tokens that marked the estimated position of the dead, and went still. He studied it for a long moment. Nobody spoke. This is the terrain between here and the wall, he asked, pointing to the northern stretch. Roughly, Jon said. And the dead are here. He touched the blue markers. Moving south. Yes. How many? The room went quiet in a different way. Lord Glover shifted. Davos looked at the fire. Hundreds of thousands, Jon said. Naruto nodded slowly. He was doing math in his head, Jon could see it, the small movements behind his eyes, the way his gaze tracked across the map, cross-referencing distances, terrain, time. And your army here is, not enough, Sansa said, quietly. No army ever is, Naruto said, not unkindly. What about the dragons? You mentioned Daenerys, she's here. Arriving within the fortnight, Jon said. Her and her forces. Dragons and armies. Okay. He looked up from the map. What does the prophecy say exactly? The room got very still. What prophecy? Lord Glover said. The one you're all thinking about, Naruto said mildly. The one everyone in this room has been wondering since I fell out of the sky whether I'm connected to. I could hear you almost say it 3 times during dinner. He looked at Davos. You especially. You have a very expressive face. Davos, who prided himself on being unreadable, looked momentarily wounded. Melisandre could tell you better than any of us, Jon said carefully. The Red Priestess, Naruto said. She mentioned a prophecy when she came north, Davos said. The prince that was promised. Born beneath a bleeding star. Carries fire within them. Will end the long night. Naruto was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the spiral on my hand. We noticed, Sansa said. My clan's symbol. Where I come from, it means, home, mostly. Protection. The place you return to. He turned his hand over, studied the mark. I was born on the 10th of October. There was a huge battle that night. A lot of things burned. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully, not hiding something, Jon thought, but compressing something that was large and complicated into a shape that fit this room. Something was sealed inside me that night. It's still there. He looked up. I'm not saying I'm your prophecy. I don't believe much in destiny. But I'm here, and the dead are coming, and I can help. So. He spread his hands. Here we are. What can you do? Lord Glover asked, with the particular edge of a man who had decided to be skeptical before the conversation began. Naruto looked at him. Not aggressively, not with any performance of menace. Just looked, with those warm blue eyes, completely relaxed. I'll show you tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow came gray and cold, which in the north was simply called morning. Naruto was already outside when Jon found him, standing in the inner courtyard in that orange jacket with no cloak over it, despite the fact that the temperature was the kind that made chainmail feel like a personal insult. He had his hands in his pockets and was watching the sparring yard with alert, appreciative eyes. 3 pairs of soldiers were running drills, and Brienne was putting Podrick through something that looked less like training and more like a formal apology for existing. You're not cold. Jon said. I run warm, Naruto said. Jon had heard that expression before. He'd never seen anyone actually embody it the way Naruto did. There was no steam rising from his breath. Jon's own breath was misting in front of him with every exhale. Naruto might as well have been standing in a warm kitchen. Lord Glover is already in the yard, Jon said. He invited about 1/3 of the garrison to watch. He wants a demonstration. He wants to see if I'm worth the trouble, Naruto said pleasantly. Essentially. Fair enough. He pushed off the wall and rolled his shoulders and fell into step beside Jon. What about you? What do you want to see? The question was direct without being confrontational, and Jon found himself answering honestly rather than diplomatically. I want to know if you fight the way you talk. Like someone who's already decided how things are going to go. Naruto grinned at him. It was a disarming grin, too genuine to be calculated, wide enough to be ridiculous, the kind of grin that made you want to smile back before you decided to. That's the best way to fight, he said. Once you've decided you're not going to lose, the rest is just details. That's an interesting philosophy for someone who's going to spar against men who've been fighting their whole lives. I've been fighting my whole life too, Naruto said, and something in his voice made it land differently than the bravado it resembled. It wasn't swagger. It was just fact. The sparring yard was indeed occupied by more spectators than it usually drew at this hour, soldiers leaning on the fence rails, wildlings clustered in a loose group at the far end with Tormund at their center looking entertained, Lyanna Mormont on a raised platform with her arms crossed, and Lord Glover standing near the center of the yard with a sword already in hand and an expression of determined skepticism. Arya Stark was sitting on the fence at the far right, eating something from her hand, watching with the calm, calculating attention of someone taking inventory. Jon had only introduced Arya and Naruto briefly the night before, in passing, but he'd seen the flicker of mutual recognition when they'd clocked each other, the way two people who are essentially the same kind of dangerous sometimes do. Arya had looked at Naruto the way she looked at a locked door, not threatened, just interested. Naruto stopped in the center of the yard and looked at Lord Glover. Morning. Morning, Lord Glover said. He was a large man, experienced, and he held his sword with the easy confidence of someone who had used it in actual war. I have a simple question. The same question anyone in this yard would have. He gestured broadly at the assembled soldiers. These men have drilled for years. They've bled on real battlefields. They are going to stand in the dark and face an army of the dead, and a lot of them are going to die doing it. His voice was not unkind, but it had no apology in it either. Why should any of them believe that you, one boy from nowhere, who dropped from the sky in a bright jacket, can make any difference to how that ends? It was a good speech. Jon had to admit it. It wasn't mean, it was the legitimate, hard question that every person in that yard was thinking, and Glover had the courage to say it plainly. Naruto listened to all of it with his hands in his pockets and his head slightly tilted, the way a person listens when they're genuinely hearing you out. Then he took his hands out of his pockets. "Pick your 3 best fighters," he said. "All at once." Glover blinked. "Against you." 3 armed soldiers against me," Naruto said. "All 3 at the same time. No weapons for me. Just to keep it interesting." The yard was very quiet for a moment. "You could get hurt," Jon said, more out of reflex than genuine concern. Something about Naruto made the concern feel misplaced, even when logic said it was reasonable. "I heal fast," Naruto said. He looked at Jon, and for just a second the expression was something older and more complicated, a whole history compressed into a single look. "Really fast." Tormund bellowed 3 names from the wildling side of the yard. They weren't the largest 3 men there, they were the fastest and meanest, which in wildling terms meant they'd survived things that would have killed ordinary men twice over. They came forward with axes and short blades, trading glances with each other that said they weren't sure whether to be offended or entertained. They spread out. Naruto tracked all 3 with that warm, easy gaze. The first one came in hard and fast from the left, a clean horizontal swing aimed at center mass, no hesitation, no telegraph. Real combat speed. Naruto wasn't there. He'd moved so cleanly, so completely without wasted motion, that several people watching weren't sure he'd moved at all until they registered that he was now standing 2 feet to the right with his head slightly tilted, watching the axe pass through where he'd been with mild academic interest. The second and third came simultaneously from different angles. These were experienced fighters, good enough to coordinate without words. Naruto dropped straight down, let the blades cross above him, came back up between them, caught both weapon arms at the wrists with 2 open-handed grips, and then simply held. Both men strained, pulled, tried different angles. Nothing. Naruto was holding 2 armed men at the wrists with his bare hands, with the same expression you'd have if you were holding 2 overexcited dogs on leashes. The first wildling recovered and came back at a run. Naruto released both wrists at the exact same moment, stepped aside, used the running man's own momentum against him with a redirection at the shoulder that sent him tumbling neatly into the dirt, rolled over his back without touching the ground, came up behind him, and was standing still again before any of them had fully registered the sequence of events. All 3 men were on the ground or stumbling back to their feet. None of them were injured. The yard was completely silent. Arya had stopped eating. "Okay," Glover said slowly. "That's footwork. Speed. I'm not dismissing it, that's extraordinary. But fighting dead men isn't about speed. They don't tire. They don't feel pain. You can't redirect something that won't." Naruto held up one finger in a polite one-moment gesture, then turned to face the far end of the yard where a training dummy stood, thick post, wrapped in rags and old leather, roughly man-shaped. He walked toward it, and as he walked, something happened. It happened gradually enough that people questioned afterward whether they'd really seen it. A golden light began to seep up from Naruto's feet, moved up his legs, spread across his torso, wrapped around his arms, until he was limned in a faint but unmistakable gold glow. Not flames. Not sorcery in any form the Northerners recognized. Just light, living and warm, coming from inside him, and where it touched the frost on the ground it melted instantly. He stopped in front of the dummy. He held out his right hand, palm up. The Rasengan formed. It started as a pinpoint, a single mote of blue-white light in his palm, spinning with a high, clean tone that cut through the cold air like a knife. It grew, not explosively but with deliberate, terrifying control, expanding into a sphere the size of his fist, rotating so fast the individual revolutions blurred into a continuous surface, a spiral storm compressed into the space of one hand, and even from 40 feet away Jon could feel the heat radiating off it, not dragon fire heat, not burning heat, but the heat of something that was fundamentally alive, like holding your hand near a sun. Naruto pressed it into the training dummy's chest. The dummy ceased to exist. Not exploded, exploded implied fragmentation, pieces, aftermath. The dummy simply stopped being a solid object at the point of contact and the energy traveled through it and out the other side and hit the yard stone retaining wall and left a circular impact mark 3 inches deep in solid rock. The silence afterward had a texture to it. Naruto turned around, hand at his side, the glow fading back to nothing, and looked at Lord Glover with exactly the same relaxed expression he'd had at the beginning. "I'm not asking you to believe I'm a prophecy," he said. "I'm asking you to let me stand next to your people when the dead come. That's it." He paused. "The rest will sort itself out." Lord Glover opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked at the wall where the impact mark was still shedding small chips of stone. "Right," he said. "Welcome to the north, then." Tormund cheered. Several other wildlings joined in. Jon stood with his arms crossed, watching Naruto, and felt something knot in his chest, not safety, not certainty, but something that resembled hope in the way that a lit torch resembles the sun. Smaller, but present. Arya dropped off the fence rail and walked across the yard with the unhurried confidence of someone who has decided something. She stopped in front of Naruto and looked up at him with those gray eyes that had seen things most soldiers twice her age hadn't. "Do it again," she said. "The spiral thing." Naruto looked down at her with immediate, genuine interest. "You want to see it, or you want to learn it?" Arya's eyes narrowed slightly, not suspiciously, but with the focused intensity of someone who had heard an offer they needed to evaluate carefully. "You think I could?" "I think I've never met anyone who couldn't, if they were willing to work for it," Naruto said. "I also think," he stopped, and something in his expression shifted, the lightness didn't leave, but something wiser moved beneath it. "I think you're the most dangerous person in this yard, including me, and I'm curious why you need the spiral thing at all." Arya was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, the beginning of a smile. "I'm Arya." "I know," Naruto said. "You were the only one in this whole crowd who was watching my feet the whole time." That evening, Jon found Naruto sitting alone on the ramparts above the eastern gate, facing north. The sun, what there was of it, was going down behind a wall of cloud, and the darkness came early and complete the way it did up here in winter. Jon pulled his cloak tighter and sat down next to him on the cold stone. Ghost materialized from somewhere and lay down behind them both, a warm weight against the wind. They sat quietly for a while. Below them the castle hummed, fires, voices, the distant ring of a hammer from the smithy that never seemed to stop anymore. "You mentioned something was sealed inside you," Jon said, eventually. "When you were born." Naruto was quiet for a moment, watching the darkness to the north. "Yeah. Is it still there now?" "Always." He didn't seem troubled by this, the word came out matter of fact, almost comfortable, the way you'd mention a scar you'd had so long it was just part of your face. "It's a fox. A very large, very opinionated fox made entirely of chakra, that's the energy I was using today. It has 9 tails and has been sealed in my body since the night I was born. His name's Kurama." Jon absorbed this. "Is he aware? Right now?" "He's listening," Naruto said, with a slight smile. "He has opinions about everything. He thinks Westeros is unnecessarily complicated and that I should stop making friends and start making strategic alliances. What do you think?" "I think strategic alliances are just friends with more paperwork." He paused. "He also thinks the energy coming from the north is something he's never felt before, which means something from something that is tens of thousands of years old and has felt basically everything has been surprised." The lightness in his voice didn't disappear exactly, but it acquired depth. "That's worth paying attention to." Jon stared north into the dark. The wall was 100 miles away, and beyond it something was moving toward them with the patience of ice. "I died once," Jon said, not knowing quite why he said it but saying it anyway. "I know," Naruto said. "Davos told me." He glanced sideways. Me too. Jon looked at him. Not the same way, probably, Naruto said. But close enough. How did it feel? Jon asked. After. When you came back. Naruto considered this seriously, with the kind of respect that said he understood the question wasn't idle. Like the world had gotten quieter, he said. And then loud again. And then, he stopped. And then exactly the same as before, which was the strangest part. You come back expecting to be different and you're just, you again. Same problems. Same people. Same stubbornness. Jon exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said. That's it exactly. They sat in the quiet together, two people who had died and come back to a world that was preparing to face something ancient and vast, and neither of them said anything for a long time, which was the most honest conversation Jon had had in months. Ghost's tail thumped once against the stone. Above them, a shooting star crossed the sky, or what Jon told himself was a shooting star, because the alternative was that it was the same light that had brought Naruto here, somewhere north of the wall, something using the sky as a road, and disappeared behind the clouds before he could follow it. Naruto watched it go. Kurama, he said quietly, and then he said something else in his language that Jon didn't quite follow, something that sounded like both a question and a promise. The wind picked up from the north and carried cold. Tomorrow, Naruto said, straightening up, the moment closing as cleanly as it had opened. You mentioned the Dothraki scouts found something northeast of here. I want to see it. It's not safe, Jon said. Not for, Naruto looked at him with those warm blue eyes, and Jon heard himself and stopped. Right, Jon said. Naruto grinned. Also, is there seriously no ramen anywhere in this castle? Not even a broth? I'm not picky. I'll have the kitchens look into it, Jon said, standing. That's all I'm asking. Naruto stood too, stretched, and looked once more to the north with an expression Jon was beginning to recognize. It wasn't worry, wasn't calculation, wasn't even determination in the usual sense. It was something quieter and more complete. The look of someone who had already decided, deep in their bones, that whatever was coming was going to meet them and not the other way around. Below them, Winterfell breathed in the dark, fires burning against the coming cold. North of the wall, something ancient and patient turned its face south. And Naruto Uzumaki stood on the ramparts of a castle he'd arrived at 12 hours ago, in a world he'd never heard of, and felt absolutely no inclination to run. Chapter 2, Fire and Foxfire. The dragons arrived before dawn. No one heard them coming, or rather, everyone heard something but couldn't identify it until it was too late to be anything other than awestruck. A low, thrumming vibration in the air, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears, like standing too close to a very large fire. The horses felt it first and began to shift and stamp in their stables. Then the sound built, and the sky above the southern approach split open with two massive shapes that blocked the stars as they passed overhead, close enough that the downwash of their wings flattened the torches on the outer walls and sent sparks spiraling across the courtyard like orange snow. Drogon banked over the castle and let out a sound that was not a roar so much as a statement, a declaration that said I exist and you should recalibrate everything accordingly. The walls shook with it. Regal circled wider, quieter, more watchful. Naruto was awake. He'd been awake for an hour already, sitting cross-legged on the roof of the guest quarters with his eyes closed, running chakra through the pathways in his legs with the focused, meditative patience of someone performing maintenance on something complicated and important. He'd felt the dragons before he heard them, not with any mystical sensitivity, just with the animal awareness of something large and warm approaching from the south, a heat signature in the cold pre-dawn dark that his body registered the way skin registers sunlight. He opened his eyes when Drogon roared and watched the two dragons circle down toward the field outside the walls, and felt Kurama stir. Big, Kurama said, somewhere behind his sternum, where the seal lived. The fox's voice was always like that in this headspace, not quite sound, more like thought with weight to it. Beautiful, Naruto said. Those are not the same thing. They can be both. A long pause. The chakra in them is old. Ancient. Older than anything I've felt from a living creature since the Sage of the Six Paths era. Another pause. I don't like that. You never like things that are older than you. I'm 10,000 years old. Very few things are older than me, which is precisely why I pay attention when they are. Naruto uncrossed his legs and stood, rolling his shoulders. Below him the castle was erupting into the controlled chaos of a garrison receiving unexpected company, torches being lit, orders being shouted, the distinctive sound of Sansa Stark's voice cutting through it all with the kind of authority that didn't need volume. He dropped off the roof, landed in the courtyard without noise, and went to find the commotion. The Targaryen host entered Winterfell at first light with the efficient, undeniable presence of an army that had crossed a continent and arrived not because they were invited but because they had decided to. The Unsullied filed in first, a grey tide of disciplined soldiers with spears and shields and the distinctive absolute absence of fear that came from people who had been taught that fear was something that happened to other people. The Dothraki followed, loud and grinning and making the northern lords deeply uncomfortable, which they seemed to enjoy. And then Daenerys. She rode a pale horse and wore dark furs over her riding clothes, her silver-white hair loose and moving in the cold wind, and she looked at Winterfell the way someone looks at a thing they've heard described their whole life and are now measuring against their imagination. Her face was composed but not closed, there was a hunger there, Naruto thought, watching from the wall, not a greedy hunger but a deep one. The kind of hunger that came from wanting something for a very long time. Her eyes moved over the gathered northerners, over Jon who had come forward to receive her, over Sansa standing straight and proud and careful as a chess player, and then, without any obvious reason, they moved upward and found Naruto on the wall. He hadn't done anything to attract attention. He was just standing there. But he had the unsettling quality of people who were completely comfortable in their own presence, they created a kind of gravity, and Daenerys had spent her life developing exceptional sensitivity to gravity. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, which was longer than most people managed, and then looked away toward Jon. Naruto leaned on the parapet and watched the reunion below, the careful greetings, the political choreography, the genuine warmth between Jon and Daenerys that both of them were trying to calibrate against the very different contexts they were now in. It was fascinating the way the dynamics of power were visible even from 40 feet up. Every posture said something. Every word chose its distance. "She's assessing everyone," said a voice beside him. Arya had appeared at his left, which she seemed to do by preference, showing up silently at his side as though she'd been there for a while and he simply hadn't noticed. Naruto had noticed. He'd just let her think he hadn't, because he suspected she preferred it, and people were more honest when they thought they were invisible. "Everyone does that," Naruto said. "She does it differently." Arya watched Daenerys below with an expression that was neither hostile nor warm but comprehensively attentive. "Most people are looking for threats. She's looking for leverage. Is that a problem?" "Leverage isn't a problem until someone decides to pull on it." She paused. "She doesn't know what to do with you yet." "She doesn't know what to do with me at all," Naruto said pleasantly. "She will." Arya looked at him sideways. "You're very confident for someone who arrived 2 days ago and doesn't know where he is." "I know where I am," Naruto said. "I'm in a place that's about to need someone who doesn't mind doing the thing everyone else is afraid to do." He shrugged. "That's the only geography that matters." Below them, Daenerys said something to Jon that made his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Jon said something back that made her eyes go sharp and careful. "Your brother's good," Naruto said. "He's not my brother," Arya said. "He's my cousin." "But yes." Something softer moved across her face and was gone. "He's very good. He just thinks too much about whether he deserves to be good. That's a common problem in people who actually are good." Arya said nothing for a moment. Then, abruptly, "Come train with me after the reception. I want to see if you can keep up when I'm actually trying." "I was wondering when you'd ask," Naruto said. The reception hall was warm, too warm, crowded with bodies and competing priorities and the constant low-grade tension of people who needed each other and resented needing each other in equal measure. Naruto sat at the long table 3 seats down from Jon and spent most of the formal welcome studying the room with the pleasant, unhurried attention of someone with no political stake in any of the currents moving through it. Daenerys held court the way she held herself, with the particular stillness of someone who had decided long ago that they would make the room come to them rather than the other way around. It was effective. Naruto watched half a dozen northern lords who had arrived intending to be suspicious walk away from brief exchanges with her in a state of cautious recalibration. She was very good. Tyrion Lannister sat at her left and ran a kind of parallel operation, softer, warmer, more tangential, catching the people who slipped past Daenerys's directness and bringing them around through a side door of wit and apparent self-deprecation. Also very good. Naruto had watched 2 people do the same complementary routine before, his old teachers Kakashi and Iruka, in very different ways, but the rhythm was the same. He was watching Tyrion work a particularly resistant lord with patient good humor when he became aware that someone was looking at him. He looked right and found Missandei watching him with open curiosity, which he appreciated more than the sidelong assessing glances everyone else was managing. "You're the one who fell from the sky," she said. "That's me," Naruto said. "You don't look like a prophecy." "I'm not," he said. "Or I might be. I'm genuinely undecided." He offered his hand across the table. "Naruto." "Missandei." She shook it with a firm, measured grip. "You're not from this continent. Not from this world, as far as I can tell." Her eyebrows rose, and then, rather than skepticism, she tilted her head with genuine intellectual interest. "That must be disorienting." "Surprisingly not," he said. "Everything important is the same. People are afraid. Something is coming. Someone has to stand in the way." He picked up his cup. "The rest is details." "Missandei speaks 19 languages," Tyrion said from 2 seats over, apparently having finished with his lord and now pivoting with the easy fluidity of someone who ran on multiple tracks simultaneously. "She's the most comprehensively intelligent person in this room, which includes me, and I say that as someone who thinks about himself quite a lot." He looked at Naruto. "I'm Tyrion Lannister. I've been curious about you since we heard about the crater." "Tyrion Lannister," Naruto said. "You're the Queen's hand. Among other things." He studied Naruto with small, sharp eyes that saw quite a lot. "You destroyed a training post in the yard yesterday." Lord Glover described it as deeply unsettling, which from him is equivalent to calling something miraculous. "The Rasengan tends to do that." "What is it?" "Spinning chakra compressed into a sphere," Naruto said. "My father invented it. I improved it." "What does it do to things harder than a training post?" Naruto looked at him steadily. "It ends them." Tyrion held his gaze for a moment, then picked up his wine. "Good," he said simply, and drank. Daenerys came to him. He'd expected to be summoned, a formal audience, a structured setting, the architecture of power deployed to establish hierarchy before any actual conversation happened. Instead she appeared beside him in the corridor after the reception had begun to thin, without attendants, with only Jorah Mormont a careful 10 feet behind her like a large, devoted shadow. "Walk with me," she said. It was phrased as a request but carried the DNA of a command, and Naruto fell into step beside her without comment, curious to see what she actually was when the throne room staging was stripped away. She walked quickly. That surprised him. She moved with the compressed energy of someone whose mind was always slightly ahead of her body, always already at the next thing. They went down a corridor, up a short stair, and out onto a covered walkway that overlooked the inner courtyard. She stopped and looked at him. "I've heard many things about the prince that was promised," she said. "I've spent years believing it was a Targaryen. Someone from my house. Someone who carried the dragon's fire in their blood." She said this without self-pity, just laid it out as context. "And then you fell out of the sky. Does that bother you?" Naruto asked. It concerns me, she said, which was a more precise answer. I don't know what you are. I don't know where your power comes from. I don't know what you want. She paused. Every person who has entered my orbit wanting something has either been honest about it or found a creative way to be dishonest about it. I've become quite good at telling the difference. What am I? Naruto asked. She studied him. I genuinely don't know. Which is unusual. That's fair, he said. You want to know if I can be trusted. If I'm going to be useful. If I'm going to be a problem. He looked at her directly. I'm not interested in your throne. I'm not interested in politics. I'm not interested in being owed anything or owing anything. There's an army of dead men coming and I'm going to help stop it, because that's what I do. I don't walk away from things like that. He held her gaze. That's the whole answer. Nothing underneath it. She was quiet for a moment, and he could see her testing it, the way you test ice before you put weight on it. You have a power inside you, she said slowly. Something sealed. Yes. Like a dragon. He considered this. Not really. But I understand the comparison. He paused. Is that what the dragons are to you? Something sealed inside you that could either protect everything or burn it down. The question landed somewhere vulnerable and she didn't hide it quickly enough. Something flickered behind her eyes, not pain exactly, but its close relative. They're not sealed. They're free. I know, Naruto said. I'm asking about you. She looked at him for a long moment, and he looked back, and it was not a comfortable silence but it was an honest one. You're strange, she said finally. That's been mentioned, he said. Something that might have been the ancestor of a smile touched the corner of her mouth, brief and controlled. Jon trusts you. Jon's sensible. Jon is reckless and noble in equal measure, she said, and the warmth in her voice when she said it was unguarded in a way the rest of her wasn't. It makes him very difficult to argue with. She turned back to look at the courtyard. I need to know you're not going to complicate things. I'm definitely going to complicate things, Naruto said cheerfully. I complicate things everywhere I go. But the complications usually help. He paused. I'll tell you when I'm about to do something that affects your plans. You tell me when your plans are about to affect mine. That's the only arrangement that works. She turned back to look at him, and this time something in her expression was different, not warmth, not yet, but the particular look of someone recalibrating. Agreed, she said. Yora, 10 feet behind them, exhaled very quietly. The sparring yard in the afternoon was different from the morning. More informal, less watched, or rather, watched differently, by people who were there because they wanted to be rather than because it was political. Arya had cleared one end of it with the ease of someone who moved through Winterfell like it was an extension of her body. She had 2 short blades and was spinning them through warm-up patterns that were lovely to watch, not showy, nothing wasted, just clean economical motion that spoke of 1,000 hours of practice taken completely seriously. Naruto watched her for a moment, then walked to the center of the yard with his hands in his pockets. Rules? He asked. First to 3 clean hits, Arya said, not stopping the patterns. A clean hit means contact that would have done damage. You call yours, I'll call mine. Can I use chakra? She paused, looked at him. Can you do it without? Yeah. Then start without. I want to see the baseline. He nodded. Took his hands out of his pockets. She came at him on the word start, not after a pause, not after a breath, right on the word, because Arya Stark had learned from experience that the gap between signal and response was where people lived or died. She was fast. Actually fast, not just impressive for a girl fast, actually trained assassin in full flow fast, and she went for the side rather than the center because she'd watched him enough to know he defended the center instinctively. He redirected the first blade and stepped through her guard in the same motion and tapped her shoulder with 2 fingers. 1, he said. She didn't stop. She incorporated the failed attack into a reversal and came back from a completely different angle with the second blade low, a beautiful combination, honestly, and he read the angle and went over instead of around and landed behind her and tapped the back of her neck. 2. She spun and faced him, and for the first time she was actually grinning. Not the controlled half-smile she'd been wearing since they met, a real one, lit up, the grin of someone who was genuinely enjoying themselves for the first time in what felt like a while. "You read the combination," she said. "You telegraphed the second blade with your left shoulder," he said. "But only barely. If I weren't specifically watching for it I'd have missed it." "Show me." He did, walked her through it slowly, standing beside her, demonstrating the micro-movement. She tried it 3 times, adjusting each time with the obsessive precision of someone who believed that perfection was not a ceiling but a direction. "Again," she said. This time she went for 30 seconds before he got the third hit, and the third hit cost him a cut along the back of his hand from the second blade that had been a genuine feint she'd gotten him. The cut sealed shut in about 4 seconds. Arya watched it happen with wide eyes. "That's the healing," he said. She stopped. "How fast does that work for serious wounds?" "Faster than you'd want to think about," he said. "It's not comfortable, but it's effective." She looked at the hand for another moment, then back up at him. "Teach me something. I've been teaching you since we started. Teach me something new. Something you do that I can't do yet." He thought about it. "Your strength is speed and precision. You're not trying to overpower anyone, you're looking for the gap, the moment when the body can't cover everything at once." He paused. "The thing I could teach you that would change your fighting most isn't a technique. It's a sense. Killing intent." Arya tilted her head. "What's that?" "Where I come from, experienced fighters can project their intent as a physical force. The most powerful version of it can stop people in their tracks, not because it hurts, but because it touches something ancient and animal in the brain that knows it's in the presence of something that could end it." He watched her face carefully. "You already do a version of this. When you walked into this yard today everyone in the immediate vicinity got slightly more careful. You do it unconsciously." Arya went very still, processing this. "But conscious is different," she said. "Conscious is the difference between being feared and being unstoppable," he said. "Want to try?" They were still at it an hour later when Jon arrived, and then Tormund arrived because Tormund went where Jon went when there was nothing strategic happening, and then somehow Davos ended up on the fence and Pod was watching from behind a barrel with the expression of someone who wasn't sure they were allowed to be watching but couldn't leave. Jon watched Arya and Naruto run through something together. A combination of her footwork and his evasion pattern merged into something new, a hybrid thing that was faster than either component, and felt a complicated emotion that resolved itself after a moment into simple, uncomplicated gladness. Arya had been becoming harder and harder to reach since she'd come home. Not colder, she was never cold, exactly, but more sealed, more self-contained, like a blade returned to its sheath. And here she was, lit up, arguing cheerfully with a 17-year-old from another world about the correct angle for a palm heel strike. "She's smiling," Davos said from the fence. "I noticed," Jon said. "I haven't seen her smile like that since," Davos stopped. "Since she was small." Tormund nudged Jon's shoulder with considerable force. "Your friend is good for this place." "He's not," Jon started, then stopped because actually, yes, that's what Naruto was, and the speed with which it had become true was something Jon was still getting used to. Naruto looked up from across the yard and caught Jon's eye and jerked his head in a come here gesture with the total lack of ceremony of someone who didn't do hierarchy. Jon crossed the yard. "What? Spar with me?" Jon looked at him. "I have things to." "No you don't," Naruto said. "You've been putting it off since this morning because you want to and you're trying to decide if wanting to is responsible right now." Jon stared at him. "I've known you for 2 days," Naruto said. "You do this thing where you use duty as a reason not to do things that are actually fine." From the fence, Davos said, quietly but clearly, "He's not wrong. Jon drew Longclaw. What followed was not a clean, demonstrative exchange like the morning's display. It was messy and fast and completely genuine. Jon fought with everything he had, with all the technique Sir Arthur Dayne's shadow had poured into him 3 years of Ned Stark's training yard, all the battlefield experience, all the desperate practical learning of a man who had survived things he should not have survived. He was excellent. He was, in terms of pure sword technique, probably the best conventional fighter Naruto had met in this world. Naruto fought him without chakra, without the golden glow, purely with the physical ability of someone who had been training since before he could read. And it was close, genuinely, honestly close, and Jon felt it, the way a musician feels playing with someone who actually knows the instrument, that living sense of matched quality. They went for 4 minutes before Naruto stepped inside a swing that should have kept him out and got a hand on Jon's sword arm, not the wrist hold from the morning, just a touch, a demonstration of access, and Jon held up. Both of them were breathing hard. Naruto was grinning. Jon was trying not to. "You're better than you let yourself believe," Naruto said. "You pulled back twice," Jon said. "You did too." Jon lowered Longclaw and looked at the ground for a moment. "I haven't sparred like that since." He shook his head. "A long time." "We'll do it again," Naruto said. He said it like a fact, settled and forward-looking, no ceremony around it. "Tomorrow. And I'll use chakra this time, because you need to know what you're standing next to in a real fight." Jon looked at him. "I've never fought beside someone like you." "No," Naruto agreed. "But you're going to." The Red Woman arrived at dusk. Melisandre of Ashai had the quality of arriving at exactly the moment that would be most dramatic, though whether this was calculation or genuine mystical timing no one had ever established. She came through the gates in red robes that moved too slowly in the wind, and the fires nearest her guttered sideways as she passed them, as if they recognized her or were afraid of her or both. She found Naruto in the Great Hall, eating dinner with Tormund and Arya and Missandei, a table that had no political rationale but had apparently self-assembled because the people at it were all, in various ways, unconcerned with political rationale. She stopped at the end of the table and looked at Naruto with the expression of someone who has been looking for something for a very long time and has just found it in the last place they expected. "The fires spoke of you," she said, in a voice that was low and compelling and accustomed to silencing rooms. "For years. A light in the dark. A spiral of fire. Born beneath red skies." Naruto looked up from his bowl. "Hi," he said. Melisandre blinked. "Sit down," Naruto said, gesturing at the bench across from him. "You look like you've been traveling." She sat, mostly because she hadn't planned not to and the invitation had disarmed the entrance she'd been building. She looked at him with those unsettling ancient eyes. "You are the prince that was promised." "So you're the second person to tell me that," Naruto said. He put his spoon down. "Listen. I understand prophecy is important to you and I'm not dismissing it. But I've met a lot of people whose whole self got tangled up in being what a prophecy said they were supposed to be, and it almost always ends badly." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not the prince that was promised. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm going to help, and if that lines up with your prophecy then great, but I'm not going to let a piece of writing change how I make decisions." A long silence. "You carry a demon in your body," Melisandre said. "He prefers chakra beast," Naruto said. "He's sensitive about the demon thing." Tormund made a sound into his cup that might have been a laugh rapidly converted into a cough. Melisandre looked at Naruto with an expression that was shifting, very slowly, from mystical authority towards something more honestly confused. "I have been wrong before," she said, and the admission cost her. He could see it, the weight of it, the particular exhaustion of someone who has made terrible mistakes in the name of certainty. "About the prophecy. About who it applied to." "I know," Naruto said. Something in his voice softened without losing its directness. "You're not wrong about the important part. Something's coming and someone has to face it. The prophecy just got the name wrong." He paused. Or maybe I'm the right person and the name doesn't matter. Either way, you want to help stop the long night? She looked at him for a moment, and something in her that had been held at a particular angle for a long time shifted. Yes. Good. He picked up his spoon again. Then you're useful, and I like useful people. Sit down and eat something. From across the table, Arya was watching Melisandre with the stillness of someone who had reason to feel very differently about the Red Woman and was recalibrating how to feel about that reason. Naruto caught her eye and held it for a second, not asking anything, just acknowledging, and Arya looked back at her food. Not resolved. But not exploding either. That was enough for now. Late that night, past the point when the castle had quieted to its night watch rhythms, Jon found Naruto in the Winterfell library. Not reading, Naruto had picked up 3 books, established that he couldn't read the local script, and set them down again. He was sitting on a table with his legs hanging off the edge, in conversation with apparently no one, which Jon now understood meant he was talking to Kurama. Jon set 2 cups of something warm on the table and sat in the chair beside it. What does he say? He asked, nodding at the general Naruto direction. Naruto blinked, came back from wherever he'd been. He says the energy from the north isn't just cold, he said. He paused, choosing words. He says it's like a seal. Like whatever the Night King is, the power he's using, it was applied to him. It's not natural. It was done to him. Jon was quiet. Bran said something the other day, Jon said slowly. About the children of the forest. About how the Night King was created. I know, Naruto said. I asked him about it this afternoon. He wrapped his hands around the cup. Someone took a man and drove a piece of dragonglass into his heart to turn him into a weapon against another enemy. And the weapon worked, but it didn't stay a weapon, it became its own thing, with its own will, its own grief, its own endless awful existence. Why does that matter for how we fight him? Naruto looked at Jon, and his expression was complicated in a way it rarely was, not uncertainty, but the particular difficulty of someone who had decided something and wasn't sure the decision was going to be popular. I don't know yet, he said. I need to see him. Jon stared. You want to? Not yet, Naruto said. I'm not going running north tomorrow, don't worry. He said it with a half-smile that Jon found not entirely reassuring. But eventually. Before the battle, I need to understand what I'm actually dealing with. He paused. Where I come from, I have a habit of trying to understand people before I fight them. And if you can't reach them? Jon asked. Then I fight them, Naruto said simply. But I always try first. Jon looked at him for a long moment, at this boy from another world who had landed in a crater outside his gates 2 days ago and somehow, in 48 hours, had become the most honest conversation Jon had had in months. You're going to get killed trying to talk to the Night King, Jon said. Possibly, Naruto said. But probably not. He grinned. I'm very hard to kill. Ask Kurama, he's tried, and we're friends now. Jon laughed. It surprised him, not the laugh itself, but how genuinely it came out, how little effort it took. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened. Outside the library window, the fires of Winterfell pushed back against the dark, and the dark pushed back, patient and enormous, and somewhere north of the wall the Night King turned his ancient face toward the warmth that had just arrived in Winterfell and felt something he had not felt in thousands of years. Curiosity. Chapter 3, The King's Sorrow. The ravens came back wrong. 3 of them sent north at dawn, standard scouts, the kind Winterfell had been dispatching for weeks to track the dead army's progress. 2 came back within the hour, erratic, off course, landing on the wrong towers and sitting there with their heads tilted at angles that made the maester deeply uncomfortable. The 3rd didn't come back at all. It was Samwell Tarly who noticed that the 2 that returned weren't carrying their messages. Not that the messages had been removed, the small leather pouches were still tied to their legs. The parchment inside had simply gone blank. Every word carefully written in the pre-dawn dark had been replaced with nothing. Clean white emptiness, as though the words had been breathed off the page. He brought this to Jon before breakfast. Jon brought it to Naruto, who was already in the maester's library reading, not the text, which he still couldn't decipher, but the maps, the illustrations, the diagrams of dead anatomy that some unfortunate scholar had produced during a previous long night that no one had survived long enough to use. Naruto looked at the blank parchment for a long moment, then held it close to the fire. Nothing appeared. "The dead are closer than we thought," he said. "How do you get that from blank paper?" Sam asked. "Because something happened to those ravens between here and there, and the only thing that changes between here and there is how close you are to whatever's driving the dead." He handed the parchment back. "It's like interference. The Night King's range is expanding." He looked at the map on the table, at the distances, at the rough position markers they'd been updating daily. "He knows we're here. He knew before, but now he's paying attention." Sam pushed his glasses up and stared at the map with the expression of someone rapidly reorganizing what they thought they knew. "That shouldn't be possible from this distance." "He's been around for thousands of years," Naruto said. "I'd be more surprised if he couldn't do things that shouldn't be possible." Jon was looking at the blank parchment. "We need to know how far out they are. Actual eyes, not ravens." "I'll go," Naruto said. Jon looked up. "I'll come with you." "No," Naruto said. Jon's jaw tightened. "I'm not staying behind while, I'm not asking you to stay behind," Naruto said, with the patient tone of someone who has already thought 3 moves ahead. "I'm asking you to stay here because Winterfell needs you here right now, with the Targaryen host just arrived and half the Northern Lords still deciding whether to trust the Dragon Queen. If you disappear north on a scouting run the morning after she arrives, the political situation gets harder. And we need that situation to hold." He paused. "I'll be faster alone. I'll be back before dark." Jon held his gaze for a long moment. "You don't know the terrain. I'll figure it out." Naruto rolled up the map he'd been studying and tucked it under his arm. "I have a very experienced navigator." He tapped his chest, indicating Kurama. "I'm not a navigator," Kurama said somewhere behind his ribs. "You know more about long-distance sensing than anyone in this castle. That's because everyone in this castle is, with respect, completely underpowered. See? Navigator." A pause. "Fine." He went over the north wall rather than through the gate, because the gate involved guards, and guards involved questions, and questions involved the kind of delay that Naruto had never developed much patience for. He dropped 30 feet to the snow below and landed in a crouch that didn't leave much of an impression, and then he ran. Real running, not the battlefield sprint of a soldier, but the full open-throttle movement of a shinobi in open terrain, which looked from a distance like the ground was simply happening faster than it should. He 8 miles without breathing hard, following the old King's Road north by memory of the map, and as he ran he opened his senses the way you open a window in a warm room, slowly, carefully, because sometimes what comes in through windows is not pleasant. The landscape changed as he moved north. The scrubby winter fields around Winterfell gave way to harder ground, then to real wilderness, then to the massive ancient presence of the northern forests where the trees were old enough that they seemed to breathe with their own rhythm, independent of the wind. The cold deepened, not gradually but in increments, like someone turning down a dial in deliberate stages. "There," Kurama said, "about 2 hours out." Naruto slowed. Stopped. He was on a ridge, a long natural rise that gave him a clear line of sight over the valley below and the plain beyond it, and what was below him made the back of his neck go cold in a way the temperature hadn't managed. The dead army was not the shambling, disorganized tide he'd half imagined from descriptions. It moved with terrible purpose, not quickly but completely, a mass of tens of thousands filling the valley floor bank to bank, the sound of it not quite sound but a vibration that lived just below hearing, felt in the teeth, in the sternum. The front line was already farther south than anyone's estimates had placed it. They'd been moving faster. Above the army, the sky was different. Wrong. A permanent cloud sealing the color of old iron sat directly over the mass of the dead and moved with it, slow and patient, and within that cloud there was occasionally a shape, vast and pale, wings that didn't need to flap because the cold air simply lifted them, a creature that was ice and wrought an ancient death and flew with the quiet authority of something that had never needed to hurry. Valyrian. The reanimated dragon, Kurama said. I can feel it from here. The chakra is inverted, it's running backwards, the way a body runs when something that should kill it is instead powering it. Naruto watched the ice dragon bank slowly over the eastern edge of the army. Even at this distance, the creature's eyes were visible, not the warm amber of a living dragon but a cold, steady blue, the same blue he'd seen described in every account of White Walker eyes he'd read. It was not a dragon anymore. It was a weapon in dragon shape, and it wore its new nature with the terrible compliance of something that had no choice. He felt a knot of anger in his chest, hot and clean. Not rage, he was past the stage in his life where anger made him stupid. But the kind of focused, burning clarity that came from witnessing something that was wrong in a way that went deeper than politics or war. He tracked backward from Valyrian, following the feeling Kurama was pulling toward. There. At the center rear of the army, elevated slightly on a natural rise, stood a figure that was and wasn't human in the way that a statue is and isn't a person. White armor or skin, he couldn't be sure at this distance, the distinction seemed less clear on the Night King than it should. He was still. Completely still, in a way that living things never quite managed. Even sleeping people had micro-movements, the small constant adjustments of a body that was ongoing. The Night King had none of that. He stood the way mountains stood, not frozen but simply there, as though stillness was his natural state and motion was the occasional concession he made to necessity. He was looking north. No, Naruto realized, tracking the angle, he was looking northwest. He was looking at the sky, at a specific point in the sky, at nothing that Naruto could see. What is he looking at? Naruto asked Kurama. A long pause. I don't know. But he's been looking at it for a while. Another pause, something Naruto almost never heard in the fox's voice, hesitation. Naruto. His chakra. What about it? It's not evil. Naruto waited. I've felt evil chakra. I've had it running through me. I know what it feels like, it has a texture, a sourness, a kind of hunger that points outward at everything. This is not that. Kurama's voice was careful, precise, choosing each sensation word like a man crossing ice. His chakra is in pain. Constant, absolute, the kind that's been going on so long it doesn't even spike anymore, it's just the baseline. Everything he does is being done from inside that pain. Naruto looked at the still figure in the center of the dead army and felt the thing he always felt, the thing that people who didn't know him sometimes mistook for naivety, that immediate, genuine, full-contact empathy, not performed, not chosen, just his first and most natural response to suffering. He didn't move toward the army. Not today. He wasn't stupid. A direct approach into 100,000 dead soldiers with the Night King at the center would achieve nothing except a very impressive display of his healing ability, and this wasn't the moment for that. But he stayed on the ridge longer than he needed to for pure scouting purposes, watching the still figure, feeling Kurama's assessment settle into him like cold water. Something was done to him. Against his will. A long time ago. And whatever he is now, whatever he's become, inside it there is something that was once a person and is still, in some form, experiencing that fact. He filed it away. Turned and ran south. He was back in Winterfell before the afternoon light had started to go. He found Jon in the war room with Daenerys, Tyrion, Davos, Yora, and Sansa, which was the current shape of the inner council, an awkward arrangement that functioned mostly because everyone in it understood the stakes were too high for the usual games. He walked in without knocking, unrolled his map on the table over the existing one, and put his finger on a point 40 miles north. They're here, he said. Not here. He pointed to the marker on the existing map. Here. They've been moving faster than your scouts reported because your scouts haven't been going far enough north before turning back. The room absorbed this. That's 2 weeks ahead of schedule, Sansa said. 10 days, Naruto said. Maybe 12 if the terrain slows them through the forest pass. He looked at the room. It's not enough time. It's enough time, Daenerys said, and her voice was steady in the way steel is steady, not comfortable, but reliable. My armies are here. We don't need more time, we need better use of the time we have. She looked at Naruto. You saw Valyrian. Yes. Her jaw tightened, very slightly, very briefly. And? He can't be saved, Naruto said, as gently as he could while still being direct. Whatever he was is gone. The dragon that's there now is a weapon. He'll need to be put down. Something in Daenerys's eyes went very still. She nodded, once, and said nothing. The Night King, Jon said. Did you see him? Yes. Naruto paused. Kurama, the entity inside me, got a read on his chakra. His energy. He looked around the room at the varying degrees of comprehension on different faces and chose clarity over precision. He's not what we think he is. He's an ancient creature of, Tyrion began. He's a man, Naruto said. Or he was. Someone took a man, drove obsidian through his heart, and turned him into something they needed. He didn't choose this. He watched the room. I'm not saying we don't fight him. I'm saying we should understand what we're actually fighting. A monster that has killed thousands of people, Lord Glover said from the back of the room. A person who was turned into a monster and has been living in that transformation for thousands of years, Naruto said, not backing down, not raising his voice. Those are different things. The first one you destroy. The second one, he paused. The second one you might be able to reach. Silence. You want to try to talk to the Night King, Daenerys said. I want to understand him before I fight him, Naruto said. Because if there's a way to end this that doesn't involve killing every reanimated corpse between here and the wall, I'd like to know about it. And if there isn't? Jon asked. Then I fight him, Naruto said. And I win. He said it without bravado, without showmanship, as a plain statement of projected fact, and the room was quiet because the people in it who had seen what he could do had no good argument against it. Bran Stark was in the God's Wood. He was always in the God's Wood, or close to it. There was a quality of stillness around him that reminded Naruto of a lake in winter, still on the surface but moving in currents underneath too deep to see. He sat in his chair before the heart tree with his hands in his lap and his eyes open, watching nothing, or rather watching things that existed in a dimension perpendicular to the one everyone else occupied. Naruto sat cross-legged in the snow in front of him and waited. After a while Bran's eyes moved to him. The eerie quality of that gaze, too steady, too patient, too aware of too many things at once, didn't bother Naruto the way it bothered other people. He'd spent years looking into Kurama's eyes from the inside of his own mindscape and learned to be comfortable with the feeling of being observed by something that knew you in ways you hadn't consciously shown. You went north, Bran said. Yeah. You saw him. I saw him, Naruto said. Tell me about the first long night. Tell me about what the children of the forest did. Bran was quiet for a moment, and the stillness around him changed quality. It went from present stillness to past stillness, the way a room feels different when you hear it was once something else. They were losing, Bran said. The first men were cutting down their forests. Burning their sacred groves. The children needed a weapon capable of destroying an enemy with greater numbers and greater strength. So they took a man. A captured warrior from the first men. They pressed a shard of dragonglass into his heart, at this tree. His gaze moved briefly, infinitesimally, to the heart tree behind him. They made him the first White Walker. The first Night King. And then they lost control of him, Naruto said. The weapon became something they hadn't anticipated, Bran said. It didn't just kill the first men. It began to kill everything. Because its original directive, the pain it had been created to project outward as violence, had no limiting principle. It couldn't stop. Because the pain had no limiting principle, Naruto said slowly. Bran looked at him. Yes. The man they transformed, he was in pain when they took him. He was a prisoner, Bran said. A warrior who had watched his people destroy everything the children loved. He was full of grief and rage and they didn't remove that when they made him into a weapon, Naruto said. They just gave it power. A silence. I've never thought of it that way, Bran said. I have a lot of experience with what happens when you take someone's pain and amplify it instead of addressing it, Naruto said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the heart tree with its carved face, its red eyes, its ancient witness to what had happened here. How much of the original man is still in there? I don't know, Bran said. I've seen through his eyes, briefly, in visions. There is something. A layer beneath the cold. Something that remembers. He paused. It didn't feel like intelligence exactly. More like a wound that never closed. A wound that never closed, Naruto repeated, very quietly. He sat with that for a while. The god's wood was silent except for the wind in the weirwood leaves, red leaves, incongruous and vivid against the gray sky, rustling with a sound that was almost like words if you listened wrong. You're trying to find a way to save him, Bran said. I'm trying to find a way to end this that isn't just another cycle, Naruto said. If we kill the Night King and leave the wound that made him unaddressed, something else grows in its place. Eventually. Maybe not now, maybe not for centuries, but eventually. He looked at Bran. Where I come from, that's how every war worked until someone broke the cycle. Just passing pain from one generation to the next with more violence in between. Bran regarded him with those two deep eyes. You broke a cycle. Tried to, Naruto said. Still trying. And if the Night King can't be reached? If the wound is too deep, too old, and the man inside it is simply gone? Naruto met his gaze. Then I put him down, he said. And I grieve for what he could have been. Both things are true at the same time. That's okay. Bran was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of someone who had seen more futures than he could count, he said, you might be the only person who could reach him. Not because of the prophecy. He paused. Because you know what it feels like to have something ancient and powerful sealed inside you, eating you from within. He would know that you know. He would feel it. Naruto said nothing. He already knows you're here, Bran said. He's been aware of you since you landed. Naruto absorbed this without visible alarm. Is that why he's moving faster? No, Bran said. He's moving faster because he's always moved faster the closer he gets to the end. The momentum of 10,000 years. A pause. But yes, he knows you're here. And he's curious. Yeah, Naruto said. I got that impression. That night the temperature dropped so fast that the water in the rain barrels froze solid in under an hour, and the fires in every hearth in Winterfell burned lower than they should have without running short of fuel. The ravens that had been acting strangely since morning went completely silent, not sleeping, not dead, just sitting on their perches with their heads at those wrong angles and their eyes open. Naruto stood on the north wall and looked out at the darkness and felt the cold pressing in from the north, felt it not as temperature but as presence, the way you feel someone standing behind you in a dark room. Tormund came and stood beside him. The big man was quiet for a while, which was unusual enough that Naruto looked over at him. Tormund was looking north with an expression that was not fear. Tormund didn't do fear in any conventional sense, but something adjacent to it. Recognition. The face of a man who had lived beyond the wall his whole life and understood in his body what was coming in a way that no southerner could. When I was a boy, Tormund said, my father told me about the long night as a story. Something that happened to other people, long ago, far away. A legend to explain why the wall existed. He exhaled a long breath that misted and curled away north. Now I'm standing on the wall's southern side and the legend is 10 days out. Are you afraid? Naruto asked. Yes, Tormund said, with the absolute, unself-conscious honesty of someone who had never learned to be embarrassed by the truth. Terrified. A man who isn't afraid of this has no imagination. He looked at Naruto. Are you afraid? Naruto was quiet for a moment, genuinely considering it. Not of dying, he said. Not of the battle. He paused. I'm afraid of getting this wrong. Figuring out too late that there was a way to stop all of this that I missed because I wasn't paying close enough attention. Tormund considered this. That's a very specific kind of afraid. It's the only kind I've got left, Naruto said. A howl rose from somewhere in the dark north, not a wolf, not anything biological, but a sound that was wind-shaped into intention, a cry that had no throat behind it and carried no warmth and lasted too long. Every torch on the north wall guttered simultaneously. That's new, Tormund said. He's announcing himself, Naruto said. The Night King. He knows I know he's coming, Naruto said. He searched for the word. It's an acknowledgement. Tormund looked at Naruto and then at the darkness and then back at Naruto. You're saying the King of the Dead is waving at you. Something like that. Ha, Tormund said. He pulled his furs tighter. I need more wine. Sam found the passage at midnight. He'd been in the library since before dinner, operating on the particular fuel of anxiety and intellectual fixation that had carried him through every crisis of his life, pulling texts that referenced the long night in any form and cross-referencing them in a way that was making his notes look like a spider had been given too much coffee and access to parchment. He brought his finding to Naruto because Naruto was awake, always awake, it seemed, or at least reliably findable in the hours when most of Winterfell was asleep, and found him in the great hall with a cup of tea and a bone he was throwing for Ghost, who had decided Naruto was acceptable company sometime in the last 2 days. Sam put the book on the table with the reverence of a man handling something fragile. This is from the Annals of the Long Night, copied from a text that dates to within a century of the original event. It was written by a maester who spoke to 3 survivors from the far north. He opened to a marked page. He says they described the Night King at the end of the first long night as, he found the passage, standing still as the world moved to take him, making no defense, only watching the coming of the dawn with eyes that had forgotten hope but not the shape of it. Naruto read the passage himself, running his finger under the words Sam translated for him. He let it end, Naruto said. That's what I think, Sam said. The accounts of how the long night ended are all very dramatic, great heroes, Azor Ahai, burning swords, final battles. But this account, this one-witness account, says the Night King didn't fight the ending. Sam pushed his glasses up. He allowed it. He wanted it to end, Naruto said. Or he was too tired to want anything by that point, Sam said carefully. The passage is ambiguous. It's not ambiguous, Naruto said, still looking at the page. The man was still in there. After 10,000 more years, he still is. He paused, searching. Further down. Buried under more. Sam looked at him with the expression he got when someone was saying something that was both unexpected and logical, and he was rapidly rearranging his mental architecture around it. You think the Night King wants to die? I think, Naruto said carefully, that the Night King has been in agony for so long that he's forgotten there are options other than continuing or ending. And I think he's moving south because he's trying to find the ending. He paused. I don't think he's trying to conquer Westeros. I think he's trying to silence himself. Sam sat down. He was quiet for a long moment, his hands flat on the table. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, he said. Yeah, Naruto said. It is. Ghost set the bone down and put his head on Naruto's knee and looked up at him with steady crimson eyes. Naruto put his hand on the direwolf's head without looking down. The dragonglass doesn't just kill White Walkers, Naruto said, thinking out loud. It shatters them. Everything else, Valyrian steel, dragon fire, destroys them, but a piece of them persists. Dragonglass shatters them completely. Removes them. Ends the pain, Sam said slowly. Ends the pain. Naruto looked at the book. That's the mercy they've been looking for. Every White Walker. Every white. That's what the Night King is driving them toward, a death clean enough to stop the screaming. Sam stared at the table. So the long night isn't an invasion, he said. It's a scream, Naruto said. A scream that's been building for 10,000 years. He closed the book gently and pushed it back toward Sam, and sat back in his chair, and the fire in the hearth burned orange and steady, and Ghost breathed slow and warm against his leg, and the castle settled around them, and Naruto thought about a boy who became a weapon against his will and has been the weapon ever since, and thought about what he had been at the beginning of his own life, and felt the familiar old anger and the familiar old ache and the familiar old resolve, settling into him. Like water settling into earth. Kurama, he said inward. I heard, the fox said. When we face him. I know, Kurama said. And for once there was no sarcasm, no edge, no 10,000-year-old irritability. Just wait. I know, Naruto. 3 days before the dead arrived, Daenerys found Naruto in the yard at dawn, watching Drogon move through the low clouds to the east, the dragon silhouette massive and black against the grey morning. She stood beside him in silence for a moment. He looks like freedom, Naruto said, about Drogon. She glanced at him, surprised by the word. He is, she said. He's everything I was promised the world could be, before anyone taught me to be afraid. Who taught you that? To be afraid? She was quiet for a moment. Everyone I loved who died, she said. And a few people who tried to break me and came close enough to leave scars. That's a familiar list, Naruto said. She looked at him sidelong. You're very young, she said. I get that a lot, he said. I'm older than I look. How old are you? 17, he said. Give or take a dimensional rift. She almost smiled, that same controlled almost smile she'd shown him on the walkway, a little more present this time, a little less contained. And in 17 years you've fought, everything, he said simply. The short version is, a missing Nin who wanted to plunge the world into endless war, a snake man who wanted to become a god, a zealot who wanted to destroy all nations in favor of his vision of peace, and my best friend, twice. He paused. The last one was the hardest. She was quiet for a while after that, Drogon banking somewhere in the clouds. Jon told me what you found, she said eventually. What the Night King actually is. What Sam and I worked out, he said. If it's true, it's true. She nodded, accepting it without the skepticism he'd half expected. Then the question of how to end this is more complicated than I thought. It always is, he said. The right answer usually is. She looked at Drogon again, then back at Naruto with an expression that was as open as he'd seen it, not unguarded. Daenerys Targaryen was never unguarded, but honest. Do you think you can reach him? The Night King? Naruto looked at the clouds where Drogon had disappeared. I think I'm probably the only person who's ever had a real reason to try, he said. And yes. He paused. But I need to be ready to be wrong. And if I'm wrong, the Rasengan, she said, using the word he'd taught her 2 days ago. The Rasengan, he confirmed. Above them Drogon came back out of the clouds, lower this time, close enough that his shadow swept across the yard, and for a moment everything was dark, and then the sun came back and the dragon was gone again north. Naruto watched it go. 10 days. Maybe 12. The Night King was coming and the long night was coming with him, and somewhere in the center of that ancient cold was a man who had been a weapon for so long he'd forgotten he was ever anything else. Naruto had met that story before. He knew how it was supposed to end. He intended to write a different ending. Chapter 4, what the dead remember, the White Walker came out of the tree line at midday. Not attacking, walking. Deliberate, measured steps through the snow at the northern edge of the field beyond Winterfell's outer walls, alone, no whites around it, moving with the particular quality of something that had decided to be visible on purpose. It stopped 200 yards from the gate and stood there. The alarm went up immediately. Horns on the walls, soldiers scrambling, Dothraki riders thundering to the northern gate before anyone had issued an order. Ser Jorah was on the wall with a crossbow loaded and aimed before Naruto had cleared the main hall's doors. Naruto cleared them at a run, looked at the figure in the snow, and stopped. "Don't shoot," he said. "That's a White Walker," Jorah said, with the tone of a man double-checking his own sanity. "I know what it is. It came out of nowhere. It's alone, which makes no sense. It could be a lure, there could be thousands in the tree line." "There aren't," Naruto said. He could feel the difference. The presence of the dead army was a cold pressure against his extended senses, miles north and moving, but this figure had a different quality. Isolated. Intentional. Kurama. One of them. No others within 2 miles. A pause. "It's not attacking." "I know." He looked at Jorah. "Don't shoot." He went through the gate before anyone could formally object, which was a pattern he was developing with some efficiency. The cold outside the walls had a different quality from the cold inside, sharper, more personal, as though it were specifically interested in him. The White Walker was tall, pale as birch wood, with armor that looked grown rather than made, crystalline plates along the shoulders and arms, the translucent blue-white of deep ice, worn with an ease that meant it had been part of this creature for a very long time. Its eyes were the cold blue that all of them had, but up close, much closer than Naruto had been during the distant scouting run, there was something in those eyes that he hadn't expected. Recognition. Not of him specifically. "Not you, I know you." More like, "I know what you are." The look of someone who recognizes a category of thing they haven't seen in a long time. Naruto stopped 10 feet away and looked at it directly, the way he looked at everything, full, uncomplicated attention, no performance of courage, just genuine presence. "Hi," he said. The White Walker looked at him. The temperature around it was extreme, the cold radiating off it in waves that left frost on every surface within a 10-foot radius, and yet Naruto stood in it with the same comfortable ease he'd stood in the Winterfell courtyard. The Walker raised one hand. Slowly, deliberately, not threateningly. In the snow between them, it drew with one finger. A shape, a spiral, starting from the outside and moving inward to a central point, 3 complete rotations, the lines deep and clean in the white surface. Naruto looked at the spiral for a long moment. Then he pulled back his sleeve and showed the back of his left hand, where his own spiral mark lived. The Walker looked at it. Then it looked at Naruto again, and the expression on its ancient face moved through something complicated and painful and slow, the way glaciers move, and then it stepped back, turned, and walked into the tree line and was gone. Naruto stood in the field for a moment, looking at the spiral drawn in the snow, and then he walked back to the gate where Jorah and 6 Dothraki riders and Jon Snow and Arya were all standing and looking at him with varying intensities of what in the known world. "It drew me a picture," Naruto said. "A picture," Jon said. "A spiral." He held up his left hand. "Like mine." The war council that afternoon was the most crowded it had been, everyone who had any claim to a seat was in the seat, and several people who had no formal claim had come anyway and weren't being turned away because the news was too significant for protocol. Sam was there with his books. Bran had been brought in his chair, positioned near the fire. Melisandre stood at the back, red and attentive. Naruto stood at the table and laid it out plainly. "He sent a messenger," he said. "Not to threaten, not to scout. To communicate. The spiral is the symbol I carry, it's my clan's mark, from my world. The Night King knew what it meant, which means he's known about me in more detail than I realized. He sent a walker to draw that symbol as I think it's an acknowledgement. A signal that he wants something. Wants what? Glover asked. Contact, Bran said, from near the fire. Everyone looked at him. I've been in his memories, Bran said, in the flat careful voice he used when translating what his visions showed him into language that fit in a room. Not deeply, he feels me when I enter and pushes me out. But before he does, I see fragments. He doesn't just want to end the living. He paused, his face showing the particular strain of someone translating something that doesn't have clean words. He wants to be seen. He's been operating at the edge of living perception for thousands of years. Everything he is, everything he's suffered, has been invisible. Nameless. He wants to be seen, Daenerys said slowly. She was looking at Naruto. And he sent that walker to the one person in this world who could see him. Because Naruto carries something similar, Missandei said, from Daenerys's left. The seal. Something that was done to him, put inside him. He recognized it, Naruto said. From here, he can feel Kurama. Not the specifics, but the quality of it, someone carrying something vast and ancient inside them against their original nature. He paused. He knew I'd understand. The room was very quiet. This changes the tactical situation, Tyrion said, and his voice had the careful precision of someone walking a very delicate bridge. If the Night King is capable of communication, of deliberate contact, of sending a single controlled messenger rather than a wave of death, he paused. Then he's capable of restraint. Which means the advance of the army is a choice, not an instinct. He could stop it, Jon said. He could slow it, Naruto corrected. I don't think stopping is, he searched for the word. I don't think he knows how to stop, anymore. The momentum is too old. But slowing, choosing how to approach, choosing the conditions of whatever comes next, he looked at the table. He's not a force of nature. He's a person making terrible choices with terrible tools because those are the only tools he has. Lord Glover put his hands flat on the table. I want to be very clear about something, he said, in the voice of a man who felt the room slipping past a boundary he thought should hold. Whatever he was, whatever was done to him, this creature has killed thousands of free folk beyond the wall. He raised the dead at Hardhome. He killed Valyrian and turned him into a weapon. He marches on everything living. He looked around the room. I respect the thinking. I understand the argument. But at the end of this conversation we are still facing an army of the dead and a being at its head who has given us no reason to think he will stop short of killing every living person in Westeros. I know, Naruto said, and the gentleness in his voice made the agreement land harder than agreement usually did. That's all true. I'm not arguing for peace. I'm arguing for understanding what we're actually dealing with so that what we do about it actually works. Killing the Night King doesn't fix the wound. It just closes the mouth of someone screaming. And if nothing fixes the wound? Glover pressed. Then I close it as cleanly as I can, Naruto said. But I want to try first. Bran went under at midnight. It wasn't planned, or it was planned by Bran, who had said nothing about intending it but had arranged himself near the fire in the God's Wood with the particular careful stillness of someone preparing for something, and when Naruto came to check on him an hour after the council broke up he found the boy already deep in the vision state, eyes white, breathing slow and steady, somewhere that was not this courtyard. Naruto sat down across from him and waited, because the only thing you could sensibly do with Bran Stark in a vision was wait. Melisandre arrived 20 minutes later. She came quietly, without performance, and sat beside Naruto on the cold stone bench with her red robes gathered around her, and for a while they simply sat in the God's Wood together with Bran between them like a lantern, his warmth the only light. What do you see in your fires? Naruto asked. Lately? She looked at the heart tree. Spirals, she said. The same mark you carry. And a face, not a face I know how to read. Ancient. Like a mask that's been worn until it became a face. The Night King's face. The fires show me what matters, she said. They showed me Jon Snow long before he was king. They showed me you months before you arrived. She paused. They showed me the end of the long night. Just once. Very briefly. Naruto looked at her. What did it look like? Quiet, she said, and seemed both comforted and unsettled by the word. Not triumphant. Not a great victory with fire and glory. Just, quiet. The way a room feels after someone stops crying. Naruto absorbed this. You were afraid of being wrong about Jon, he said. It wasn't an accusation. About who the prophecy pointed to. I burned people, she said. It came out flat and direct and fully owned, the voice of someone who had stopped performing remorse and was simply living with it. In the Lord of Light's name. In the name of that prophecy, I burned people. She looked at her hands. If I was wrong about the prophecy, then I was wrong about everything. Every choice I made from that certainty. You weren't wrong about everything, Naruto said. You were wrong about the specifics. The prophecy pointed at something real, the long night, the end of it, the need for someone to face it. He paused. You were reading a map by lamplight and calling the shadows landmarks. She looked at him with those ancient eyes. That's a generous reading. I'm not generous, he said. I'm practical. The past is the past and you're here now, and what you do from here is the part that matters. He looked at Bran. You've been wrong before and you're still here and still trying. Most people don't make it that far. A long silence, not uncomfortable. Where I come from, Naruto said, there was a woman. A legendary medic. One of the 3 greatest ninja of her era. She spent years refusing to use her healing abilities because she'd used them on people she loved and watched them die anyway. She let her gifts rot rather than risk being hurt again. He paused. The moment she stopped running from her failures was the moment she saved more lives than she could count. Melisandre was quiet for a long time. What was her name? She asked. Tsunade, Naruto said. She was also terrible at cards and had a drinking problem. She was completely human and completely extraordinary. He smiled. Most people are both. Bran made a sound, not speech, a kind of deep exhale that signaled he was surfacing from wherever he'd been. His eyes came back, dark and deep, and he looked at the heart tree for a moment before he looked at Naruto. I saw him, Bran said. Naruto straightened. The Night King. The man he was, Bran said. Before. His voice was stripped of its usual careful flatness, something raw at the edges. His name was Arlen. He was 32 years old. He had a daughter. Younger than Arya. He stopped and breathed. They took him in winter, when his people's camp was overrun by the first men. He fought until he couldn't. And then the children, he stopped again. It's okay, Naruto said quietly. They didn't tell him what they were going to do, Bran said. He didn't understand it. He thought it was an execution. He closed his eyes and thought of his daughter's name. He looked at Naruto with eyes that had seen too much for his age in a way that was completely different from Naruto's own version of the same thing. And then he became something that couldn't close its eyes. That couldn't think a private thought. That couldn't stop. The god's wood was absolutely silent. Arlen, Naruto said. The name felt important to say out loud. Important to give it sound. He's still in there, Bran said. I felt him. Buried under 10,000 years of the other thing, but present. Like a coal under ash. No flame. Just heat. Naruto was quiet for a long moment. Kurama. I know, the fox said. And there was a depth to those 2 words that Naruto understood completely, because Kurama knew better than anyone alive what it felt like to be trapped inside a nature you hadn't chosen, to have what you were fundamentally altered by something applied from outside. Can we reach him? I don't know, Kurama said, which was the most honest answer he could give. But you should try. Not because it will definitely work. A pause. Because trying is who you are, and it would be wrong to be anything else now. Naruto exhaled slowly. I need to get a message north, he said. Melisandre looked up. To the Night King. To Arlen, Naruto said. Getting the message north required a raven they could guarantee would not come back blank, which required Melisandre's fire blessing applied to the bird in a ritual that made the maester deeply uncomfortable but which produced a raven that sat in the hand with its eyes burning faintly orange and did not seem the least bit concerned about flying north into the dead army's range. The message was short. Naruto wrote it himself, Sam translated it into the common script, because Naruto still couldn't, and it said, I know your name. I know what was done to you. I am not afraid of you. I want to speak before the end. NU. They sent it at dawn. It didn't come back blank. It didn't come back at all. 4 hours later, Jon found Naruto at the forge. Not smithing, watching the smith work, with the focused attention he gave to anything that involved precision and skill and the transformation of raw material into something shaped by deliberate force. The smith, a taciturn man named Harwin who had been doing this job for 30 years and had never had an audience before, had initially been unsettled by the presence and was now operating with the particular confidence boost that came from someone genuinely interested in watching you be good at your work. There's a problem, Jon said. Naruto didn't look away from the forge. Cersei. Jon stopped. How did you? Tyrion has been carrying it for 3 days, Naruto said. He's been cheerful in that very specific way people are cheerful when they're managing bad news. And Daenerys has been harder in the war councils, not softer. The closer the dead get, the more she should be relaxing into the certainty that the immediate fight is the priority, but instead she's getting more rigid, which means something is pulling at her from behind. He looked at Jon. What did Cersei do? Jon exhaled. She's not coming. She never intended to come. The Golden Company she promised, they've landed at Casterly Rock and they're sitting there. He paused. She told Jaime she was going to let the North fight the dead and let the dead finish whatever the North couldn't, and then she'd take back the throne from whoever limped south. Classic, Naruto said, without a lot of heat in it. Who knows? Tyrion. Me. Sansa, as of an hour ago. Daenerys? Not yet. Naruto finally looked away from the forge. He looked at Jon with the kind of attention that took inventory quickly and thoroughly. Jon had the face of a man who was holding two things, the immediate tactical problem and the personal weight of being the one who had to tell Daenerys that the alliance she'd built significant emotional investment around had been a lie from the start. How's she going to take it? Naruto asked. Badly, Jon said. She's going to want to fly south with Drogon and burn Cersei out of King's Landing right now, before the dead arrive, before any of this is resolved. She's going to call it the right move and she might not be entirely wrong. He paused. But if she goes south now, the North fights the dead without her and Drogon, Naruto finished. He thought for a moment. Do you need me there for the conversation? Yes, Jon said, without hesitation. Okay. Daenerys took the news the way an ocean takes a thrown stone, it went in, it disturbed the surface, and then the surface reassembled with a cold, deep, powerful calm that was somehow more dangerous than waves. She said nothing for 15 seconds after Tyrion finished speaking. Nobody in the room, Jon, Tyrion, Yora, Naruto, Missandei, Varys, said anything either. The fire crackled. Outside the window the wind had picked up from the north, carrying the particular quality it had been carrying for 3 days now, that edge of something old and intentional. Then she said, quietly, I want to burn her out. I know, Jon said. She played us all. Daenerys's voice was level but there was a current in it like the current beneath still water. She made promises she never intended to keep and let us make plans around those promises. She's letting the North die as a calculated political move. Yes, Tyrion said. And you want me to set that aside and focus on the dead? She looked at Tyrion with eyes that were doing something complicated. Because that's what you're about to argue. I'm about to argue, Tyrion said carefully, that the dead are 10 days out, possibly 8, and if you fly south now you leave this army without air support, without Drogon, without me, Daenerys said. Without you, Tyrion confirmed. She looked at the fire. The silence stretched. Daenerys, Naruto said. She looked at him. Cersei is going to be there when this is over, he said. The dead won't be. Whatever she's done, whatever she's planning, it will still be there to deal with. It's not going anywhere. He held her gaze. The Night King is. 8 days from now or 10 days from now he'll be at these walls, and whatever happens here determines whether Cersei gets to be a problem at all. I know that, she said, with a slight edge. I know you know, he said, without flinching. I'm saying it anyway because the part of you that's angry right now needs to hear someone say it out loud rather than just argue tactics at you. He paused. You're right to be furious. Cersei betrayed you and she's going to pay for it. That is absolutely going to happen. He let a beat fall. Not before we stop the thing that ends the world. Daenerys looked at him for a long moment. Then at Jon. Then at Tyrion. Then, in a very controlled voice, when this is over, every one of you will remind me of this moment if I try to be merciful to Cersei Lannister. Gladly, Tyrion said. Count on it, Naruto said. Jon said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She looked at the fire again. Fine, she said. We fight the dead first. A pause. And then we deal with the queen who watched. 3 days before the army of the dead arrived, Arya found Naruto on the eastern wall at night. He was sitting with his legs hanging off the parapet, looking east rather than north, which was unusual enough that she noticed it. She sat beside him in the same posture, legs over the edge, the ground a long way down. They were quiet for a while, the way they'd gotten comfortable being quiet together, which was something neither of them was naturally or easily quiet with most people. You're thinking about the Night King, she said. Always, he said. You think you can actually reach him? Really reach him, not just talk at him. I think there's a part of him that's been waiting for someone to try for 10,000 years, Naruto said. That doesn't mean it works. But yeah. I think it's possible. Arya was quiet for a moment. What do you do if it doesn't work? Kill him, Naruto said simply. Just like that. Just like that, he confirmed. I've never wanted to kill anyone. I'm not bloodthirsty. But I've done it when I had to. He looked at the eastern dark. The difference between me and most fighters isn't that I'm willing to kill. It's that I'm only willing to do it as a last resort, and I know the exact moment when the last resort has arrived. Arya considered this carefully. How do you know the exact moment? Because I've done everything else first, he said. When you've genuinely exhausted the other options, the moment is obvious. There's no doubt. It's just the next thing. She pulled one of her short blades and turned it in her hands, not threateningly, just the habitual comfort of a person whose hands like to be doing something when their mind is working. I have a list, she said. Not explaining, not elaborating, just offering the fact. I know, Naruto said. She looked at him sideways. You have the same quality he does, Naruto said. Bran. You've seen things and done things and made decisions that have closed off certain soft parts of you. The parts that used to panic, that used to be surprised by cruelty. He paused. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying you carry it carefully. You make it sound like a burden, Arya said. Isn't it? A long pause. Sometimes, she said. Less than it used to be. She looked at the blade in her hands. I went to Bravos to learn to be no one. To kill the part of me that was Arya Stark. She stopped. I couldn't do it. I tried for years and I couldn't. Good, Naruto said. Why good? Because Arya Stark is who's going to survive this, he said. Not no one. Arya Stark, who loves her family and hates injustice and is the most terrifying person in a yard full of trained soldiers. He paused. No one would have been the loss. Arya was quiet for a long time. The wind off the east wall was cold and smelled of pine from the distant forest. Don't get killed trying to save the Night King, she said finally. Don't be stupid about it. I'm never stupid, Naruto said. You wear an orange jacket in a winter war zone. That's a choice, he said, with dignity. Arya laughed, actually laughed, a real one, short and bright in the dark, and it startled them both slightly with its genuineness. She turned away quickly, like she wanted to recover the expression before he could look at it too long, but it had already happened. Naruto was smiling when he looked away. 2 nights before the army of the dead arrived, Naruto woke at 3 in the morning to Kurama's voice, sharp and immediate. Naruto. Now. He was off the bed and at the window in a single motion, and what he saw in the sky over Winterfell stopped him cold. The sky to the north was wrong. The cloud ceiling that had been advancing slowly for days had accelerated, it was close now, pressing south, and within it there was a light that had no business being in a cloud ceiling, a cold, blue-white luminescence, diffuse and steady, like the sky itself had become the inside of a glacier. And within that light, barely visible, something was written. Not words, not in any script he knew. Shapes, large enough that he could see them from his window, carved in the cloud itself with a light that burned blue-white against the gray. Spirals. 3 of them, nested inside each other, and at the center of the innermost spiral, a single vertical line. Kurama, Naruto said aloud. I see it, the fox said. What does it mean? A very long pause, and Naruto could feel Kurama reaching back through 10,000 years of accumulated memory, through every piece of ancient knowledge that lived in the body of the oldest chakra beast in existence. It's an answer, Kurama said. To the message you sent. Another pause, and this one had something in it that Naruto almost never heard from the fox, something that might have been reverence, or might have been grief. The spirals mean, I am here. The line means, I was. He's saying he exists, Naruto said. He's saying he remembers that he existed, Kurama corrected. Before. The fox was quiet for a moment. The name. Arlen. He received the name. You giving him back his name, Naruto, something happened. Something moved. Naruto stood at the window looking at the message written in the sky in the Night King's light and felt the thing he always felt at moments like this, that terrible, tender, stubborn certainty. Not that everything would be all right. Not that it would work out cleanly. Just that this was real. The man was real. Whatever had been done to him was real, and whatever remained was real, and that meant the situation was not simply a monster to be killed but a story to be finished in the right way. He pressed his hand against the cold glass. The spiral mark on the back of it caught the blue light from outside and seemed to pulse, once, warm gold against the cold blue. Outside, the shapes in the clouds began to fade. He stood there until they were gone, and then stood a little longer, and then went back to the bed and sat on the edge of it and was very quiet for a long time. Okay, he said, eventually, to Kurama, to himself, to the dark. Okay. He lay back down. Closed his eyes. And did something almost impossible given the circumstances, he slept. Because in 2 days the long night would begin, and he needed to be rested, and he had already made every decision there was to make. The rest was just details. Chapter 5, The long night begins. The dead arrived at dusk. Not at the expected hour, every projection, every scout report, every calculation Tyrion and Sansa had built their defensive timeline around said dawn. Dawn was when the dead had always advanced in every recorded account, moving with the pale light, using the half-dark to maximize the terror of their approach. They came at dusk instead, and the choice felt deliberate, felt personal, like a correction made by something that had been predictable for 10,000 years and had recently decided to be otherwise. The Outriders saw them first. 3 Dothraki riders who had gone north on a final scouting pass came back at a gallop without their formation, which already said everything, and the lead rider pulled his horse up at the gate and said 7 words that carried across the entire gathered yard: the horizon. It moves. It is all of them. And then the horn sounded. 3 long blasts. The cold hit next, before the dead were visible, before the sound of them reached the walls, just a drop in temperature so sudden and complete that the breath of every soldier on the battlements turned to steam simultaneously, torches guttered sideways and stayed there, and the ground itself seemed to exhale the last of its warmth into the air and surrender. Naruto was already on the eastern wall. He'd been there for 2 hours, sitting cross-legged at the parapet, eyes closed, running through the breathing pattern that opened Sage Mode, not completing it, not committing the resources yet, just keeping the channel clear and ready, the way you keep a door on its hinges when you might need to open it fast. Kurama was awake and alert in the background, quiet for once, all of his vast energy focused and still. When the horn sounded, Naruto opened his eyes and stood. Below him on the field the entire Winterfell defensive structure was assembling with the efficient, disciplined terror of people who had been preparing for something they hoped wouldn't happen and now had to accept that it was. Unsullied shields locking into line on the southern and western approaches. Dothraki cavalry staging east, ghost pale in the fading light, those warriors whose courage was simply not in question but whose weapons were about to meet something entirely outside their experience. Northern soldiers on every battlement with longbows and crossbows, and the expressions of people who had been told what was coming and had believed it and were still being surprised by the reality of it. Jon was below him, on horseback near the main gate, organizing the mounted response with the contained, efficient calm that he seemed to access in crisis, all the weight he carried normally compressed into something dense and functional, the grief and uncertainty becoming fuel rather than drag. Daenerys was in the yard near Drogon, one hand on the dragon's neck, and even from the wall Naruto could see the conversation happening between them, not words, something older and more direct, the communication of 2 creatures who were extensions of each other's will. Naruto looked north. The horizon moved. That was exactly the right word for it. It wasn't a line of individual figures resolving out of the dark, it was the dark itself advancing, the tree line becoming indistinct and then disappearing as something absorbed it, the entire northern visible world replaced by a mass that had its own texture, its own sound, a bone-deep vibration that was below hearing and above feeling and lived in the place where the body registered things that the mind hadn't processed yet. Above the mass, the cloud ceiling came with it, lit from within by that cold blue-white, and within the cloud's Valyrian was a shadow moving against the luminescence, vast and patient. "Here we go," Kurama said. "Here we go," Naruto agreed. He dropped off the wall. Not falling, he caught the parapet with one hand on the way down and redirected into a controlled swing that brought him to the lower battlement, caught that, redirected again, and landed in the yard in a single fluid sequence that deposited him next to Jon without any of the ceremony of using stairs. Jon looked at him. "Eastern wall," he said. "They're going to hit the eastern approach first, the terrain funnels them that way. If the eastern line breaks, it won't," Naruto said. I know how many there are," Naruto said. "I'll hold the eastern wall." He said it the way you say "I'll carry that" when someone is struggling with something heavy. No drama. Just logistics. Jon looked at him for a moment, and Naruto saw the thing he always saw in Jon, the tension between trust and the need to feel like he was doing enough, like he was carrying his share. He reached out and put a hand on Jon's shoulder briefly. "The center needs you," Naruto said. "You're the one they'll follow when it gets bad in the middle. When Daenerys pulls back to rearm Drogon and the unsullied line is taking pressure from 3 sides and someone needs to hold the yard, that's you. That's where you matter most." He held Jon's gaze. "Don't waste yourself on the eastern wall." "I've got the eastern wall." Jon exhaled. "Don't die." "Working on it," Naruto said, and he grinned, the ridiculous, wide, genuine grin that had been making people feel better about terrible situations for his entire life, and moved east. The first wave hit the eastern approach like a tide. Not a wave in the dramatic sense, there was no crest, no curling peak, just an advancing mass that met the outer trench line and kept coming, filling the trenches the way water fills a low place, the sheer numbers converting every defensive feature into a temporary inconvenience. The archers on the eastern wall put arrows into the front ranks steadily and efficiently, and the front ranks fell and the ranks behind them kept coming and the archers kept shooting because it was the thing to do even when it was clearly mathematics that wouldn't work in their favor. Naruto stood at the center of the eastern battlement and watched the wave come, and felt the distance close, and breathed. "Now," Kurama said. "Not yet." The first dead reached the wall. Hands on stone. Then feet. They climbed with the awful patience of things that did not feel pain, that could not be tired, that processed the concept of obstacle purely as information without the emotional weight that made obstacles demoralizing to living things. The first one crested the battlement 15 feet to Naruto's left and 2 soldiers were immediately in trouble. Naruto was there before it landed. He came in from the side and drove a chakra-charged palm strike into its chest that didn't just knock it back over the wall but sent it through 2 more whites on its way down, the impact scattering them like the dead weight they were. 3 seconds later 2 more crested on his right. He moved between them, fast enough that the soldiers nearby registered movement and result without clearly seeing process, and both whites were back over the wall. It escalated quickly. The dead didn't respond to individual defeats. There was no morale to break, no cohesion to disrupt. Removing 50 from the mass that was pressing against the eastern wall was a rounding error, and the mass knew it and pressed on anyway. In 3 minutes Naruto was no longer picking off individuals at the edges. He was standing at the center of the battlement with the dead coming over the wall in a continuous flow and managing the entire eastern line alone. He opened the channel. Sage mode came on like a sun rising in reverse, starting from everywhere and concentrating inward, the golden light seeping up from his feet and moving up his body in 3 seconds until he was fully limbed in it, the mark on his hand blazing bright enough to be visible from the yard below. His senses expanded outward to a radius that covered the entire eastern approach and 50 feet beyond. He could feel every individual dead thing pressing against the wall, could feel the positions of the soldiers on his flank, could feel the temperature differential between the dead and the living in a pattern that let him move through the chaos without causing collateral damage. And then he started moving. What happened on the eastern wall for the next 2 hours was something the soldiers who survived it spent the rest of their lives trying to describe and never quite managed. They said he moved like water, which wasn't right. They said he moved like fire, which was closer. He was everywhere on the eastern section simultaneously, not through any mystical multiplication but through pure speed and tactical precision. He read the pressure points, the places where the dead were about to breach in numbers, and he was there before they breached, every strike landing with the full weight of Sage mode behind it, the dead flying back in arcs, the wall holding. He didn't use the Rasengan. Not yet. The Rasengan in this density would create a gap in the wall itself. He needed the structure, needed the eastern approach controlled, and so he fought with hands and feet and chakra pulses and his own body as a blunt force instrument, and the eastern wall held. The soldiers around him adapted quickly, which was a credit to them. They stopped trying to match his tempo and started working with it, filling the gaps he created, finishing the stragglers he redirected, the whole eastern line becoming a kind of organism that had Naruto as its violent, luminous heartbeat. "You're tiring," Kurama said, at the 40-minute mark. "I'm fine. You've been in Sage mode for 40 minutes continuously. You need to cycle." "Not yet. Naruto, not yet." He ducked under a white's arm, redirected its momentum over the wall, came up and drove his elbow into another and felt the bones of his arm flex and reseal in less than a second. When the line is stable. The line was not stable for another hour and 20 minutes. When it finally stabilized, the dead still pressing but the rate of breakthrough reduced from a cascade to a manageable trickle, Naruto stepped back from the front rank, set his hands on his knees, and breathed for 30 seconds. He let Sage mode drop, felt the coolness of ordinary sensation return, and cycled his chakra back to baseline before reopening the channel at half capacity. One of the northern soldiers, a grizzled man with a scar that bisected his left eyebrow and the expression of someone who had stopped being surprised by most things decades ago, came and stood next to Naruto in the brief stable moment and looked at him with something that wasn't awe exactly. It was the look of a craftsman watching another craftsman work. "You good?" the man asked. "Yeah," Naruto said. "There's more coming on the lower flanks. Maybe 10 minutes before the trench fills enough for them to." "I know," Naruto said. "I can feel them." He straightened. "What's your name?" "Clay," the man said. "Clay. When the next wave hits the flanks, push your line inward, don't try to hold the full width, let me manage the outer edge. You focus on keeping your people together." He looked at the man. "Can you do that?" Clay looked at the wall, at the eastern approach, at the dark mass pressing against it. Then back at Naruto. "Yeah," he said. "I can do that." "Good." The next wave hit at the exact moment Naruto predicted. In the center yard, things were worse. Jon had known they would be. The center yard was where the unsullied line would face the most pressure once the dead found the weaknesses in the outer wall, and the dead found them with the systematic patience of water finding cracks. By the second hour the outer ring had been breached in 3 places and the fighting had pulled back to the inner yard, and Jon was holding the center personally with Longclaw singing in the dark and Ghost moving at his flank like a white sword. Daenerys and Drogon had made 3 passes over the advancing dead and each pass had been devastating. Dragon fire moved through the dead army in lines of absolute destruction, the whites burning and staying burned, the blue-white fire from the sky above doing nothing against Drogon's orange heat. But Viserion was in the clouds somewhere and Drogon felt it and Daenerys felt Drogon's wariness and kept the passes short. Then Viserion came out of the clouds. It came from the east, screaming, not the roar of a living dragon, something else. Something that had the shape of a roar but the texture of ice cracking across a vast surface, and it hit Drogon with a blast of blue fire that knocked the dragon sideways in the air. Drogon recovered, circled, came back, and they met above the yard in a collision of fire and ice that lit the whole castle in shifting colors, and every person in the yard stopped for one involuntary second to watch 2 dragons fighting in the sky. It was not a balanced fight. Viserion had been remade for one purpose. The cold blue fire it breathed could do something ordinary fire couldn't, and the blast it put into Drogon's left wing opened a tear that Drogon screamed and compensated for but that pulled him out of the air. He landed hard in the outer yard, one wing folded wrong, and Daenerys was off his back before he hit the ground and running toward his head, pressing her hands against the side of his face, talking to him in the low urgent way she talked to the dragons when they were hurt. Drogon was down. Viserion banked overhead, orienting, and Jon's blood went cold. "Archers on the upper walls," he shouted. "Everything you have at." The arrows went up in a volley and most of them glanced off reanimated scales and achieved nothing. Viserion began to descend, slow and purposeful, toward the inner yard. Naruto landed in the center yard from the eastern wall at a dead run. He hadn't been summoned. He'd felt it, felt the temperature differential from 400 yards away, the cold signature of the reanimated dragon displacing the air differently from a living one, and he'd left the eastern wall to Clay and the reorganized line and run. He hit the center yard at full speed and didn't slow down. "Naruto!" Jon shouted. Naruto looked up. Viserion was 30 feet above the inner yard, descending, mouth beginning to open for the cold blast that had grounded Drogon. The blast from a reanimated dragon released at this range inside these walls would kill everything in the yard and probably take a significant portion of the walls with it. Naruto went up. He didn't jump, jumping implied a single explosive extension. He ran up the side of the inner keep wall without pausing, his feet finding purchase on the vertical stone surface through chakra adhesion, hit the top of the wall at full speed, launched off it, and met Viserion in the air. What he had was momentum and the Rasengan. The Rasengan formed in his right hand as he ascended, the spinning sphere blazing blue-white in the dark, spinning so fast it compressed the air around it, and the sound it made cut through the chaos of the battle below like a knife. He met the ice dragon at the apex of his trajectory, where Viserion's neck met its chest, and he drove it home. The impact lit the sky. Not an explosion, a detonation, a single massive release of compressed rotational energy that did not care about the target's size or what it had been remade from. It punched through scales that had resisted longbow volleys and went into the center mass and kept going, and Valyrian, the creature that had once been a living dragon and had been twisted into something else, came apart from the inside. Not violently. Not in fragments. It collapsed, the reanimation failing all at once the way a flame fails when you cut off its fuel, the blue light in its eyes going out while it was still in the air, and the body descended into the outer yard and hit the ground with a sound like a building falling and was still. Naruto fell the 30 feet back to the yard in an orientation that was not ideal, tucked, rolled, came up with chakra damage registering in his shoulder and upper arm and sealed in under 4 seconds. The entire inner yard was looking at him. Silence in the middle of a battle, which was its own kind of sound. Eastern wall is holding, Naruto said to Jon, who was standing 10 feet away with Longclaw in his hand and an expression Naruto couldn't read in the dark. I need to get back to, Naruto, Jon said. I'm fine. I know you're fine. Look. Naruto looked where Jon was indicating, to the northern edge of the inner yard, and felt the temperature change before he understood what he was seeing. The Night King was at the outer gate. Not his army, the army had pressed past the outer walls and was still pressing, the battle still happening on every approach. But the Night King himself had come through the dead with the same unhurried, absolute certainty with which he did everything, and he was standing at the edge of the inner yard in his ice-white armor, and his eyes were the cold blue of everything Naruto had been feeling for weeks. But he wasn't advancing. He had stopped at the entrance to the inner yard and he was standing still, the way he'd stood still on the ridge 2 weeks ago, and he was looking at Naruto with an expression that was the most complicated thing Naruto had ever seen on a face that wasn't supposed to be capable of complexity. He was looking at Naruto the way a man looks at something he had given up believing existed. The soldiers near the Night King were backing away. Not running, they'd been trained past the point of simply running, but moving back with the compulsive unanimity of people whose bodies were making the decision before their minds could weigh in. Jon was not backing away. Neither was Ghost, who had padded to Jon's left shoulder and was standing with his tail low and his red eyes fixed. Naruto walked toward the Night King. Naruto, Jon said, his voice carefully level. Stay back, Naruto said. Not aggressively, just clearly. He kept walking. Everyone stay back. He covered the distance between them in a straight line, no weapons, no sage mode, no golden light, and stopped 6 feet from the Night King and looked up at him. The creature was taller than a man by half a head, the ice-white face that was and wasn't a face, the eyes that were cold and alive and in pain and had been in pain for 10,000 years. Arlen, Naruto said. The name in this context, in the middle of a battle with the dead pressing every wall of the castle, with fire in the sky and steel everywhere and the screaming of things that should not still be moving, the name landed like a stone dropped in still water. The Night King went utterly still. He had been still before, but this was different. This was the stillness of something that had just been struck somewhere it had forgotten it could still be struck. I got your message, Naruto said. I was here. I was. He kept his voice quiet, direct, completely without fear. I know what they did to you. I know you didn't choose this. The Night King's jaw moved. An almost imperceptible tightening, a micro-movement that had nothing to do with cold or war or 10,000 years of the dead. I've been inside something I didn't choose since the night I was born, Naruto said. I know what it feels like to be a vessel for something vast and terrible that belongs to you and doesn't belong to you at the same time. I know what it feels like when the thing inside you is so loud you can't hear anything else. He held the Night King's gaze. I hear you. Arlen. He paused. I see you. Something happened in the Night King's face. It was subtle, a relaxation of something that had been held at extreme tension for so long it had become structural, like a load-bearing wall choosing to rest. His eyes moved, not away, but across Naruto's face, reading something there with the desperate attention of someone who has been illiterate for 10,000 years and has just been handed words. From the walls and the yard behind Naruto, the fighting continued, the dead pressing, steel ringing, fire crackling, ghosts' occasional sharp bark. The battle hadn't stopped. The Night King's presence at the inner yard hadn't stopped the army, because the army wasn't receiving commands it needed to consciously issue, it moved on its own momentum. But the Night King was not moving. He was standing in the middle of his own war and not moving. "What do you want?" Naruto asked. "Not the army. Not the long night. You. What does Arlen want?" The Night King opened his mouth. And for a moment Naruto thought he was going to speak, thought the 10,000 years of cold silence were going to crack and something human would come through it, and then a sound built in the air that was not language but was not without meaning either. It was the sound the sky made in the signal he'd written in the clouds. It was the sound of the spiral and the single vertical line. It was the sound of I was. And beneath it, so quiet it was less sound than implication, a word. One word, in a language Naruto should not have been able to understand but understood completely, understood in the bone-deep way you understand things that bypass translation, enough. Naruto held the Night King's gaze and nodded, slowly. "Okay," he said. What happened next was something none of the observers agreed on afterward, because none of them had the context for what they were watching. The Night King raised one hand. Not toward Naruto, sideways, toward the eastern wall, where the dead were still climbing in numbers. And something moved through the dead army like a current through water, a signal, a pulse, an instruction that wasn't spoken but arrived anyway, and the dead at the eastern wall stopped climbing. Not all of them, not the full army, but the eastern section held, as though the Night King had turned a dial back a single degree. Proof of something. Acknowledgement of something. A gesture made visible. Yoram Mormont, watching from 40 feet away, said afterward that what he saw next looked like two opponents measuring each other before a fight. Tormund said it looked like a conversation. Arya, who had better eyes and better instincts than both of them, said it looked like something she didn't have a word for, two people standing at the edge of something that could go either way, and the space between them being the most important thing in the yard. The Night King looked at Naruto for a long moment. Then he looked at the castle around them, the fighting on the walls, the fires, the dead and the living tangled together in the dark, and something moved across his face that was the largest, oldest thing Naruto had felt from him yet. Something vast and exhausted and complex that had no single emotion name because it was too many emotions compressed into a single expression by too many years. Then he looked back at Naruto, and his eyes were different. Not warm, that was too much to ask, too much to be possible in this body, in this form. But present. The eyes of something that was making a genuine decision rather than executing an old momentum. He reached out. Not attacking, his hand extended toward Naruto the way you extend a hand when you want something taken from you. The same gesture Naruto had used 10,000 times in his own world, offering a hand to someone who needed to be pulled up from somewhere bad. Except he was extending it palm down. Offering something rather than requesting it. Above his palm, the cold blue light that lived inside every White Walker, inside every reanimated corpse in the army pressing against Winterfell's walls, that light concentrated, pulled, coalesced, gathering from the air around him and above the castle walls and out of the sky where the ice dragon had fallen, gathering into his palm in a sphere the color of winter and deep water. He held it. Naruto looked at it. Then at the Night King's face. Then back at the sphere. "Is that," he said, half to himself, half to Kurama. "His seal," Kurama said, and the fox's voice was as quiet as Naruto had ever heard it. "The thing they put in him. He's holding it outside his body." A pause that contained something like awe. "Naruto. He's asking you to end it." The fighting on the walls was still happening. Somewhere to the west Drogon roared. Someone shouted an order in Valyrian. The world was still being its terrible, ongoing self in every direction. Naruto looked at the sphere of cold light in the Night King's hand. Looked at the Night King's face. At Arlen's face, behind the 10,000 years of ice, behind the armor and the cold and the army of the dead. At a man who had waited so long for someone to see him that he'd stopped believing anyone would. You could have done this yourself, Naruto said. This. He nodded toward the sphere. You could have ended it. You chose not to. The Night King, Arlen, held his gaze. You were waiting for someone to do it with you, Naruto said. So you wouldn't die alone. The sphere of cold light pulsed once, the way a heart beats. Naruto reached out and put his hand alongside the Night King's, not gripping it, not fighting it, just alongside, and the Rasengan formed between both their hands, blue-white from the Night King's power and gold from Naruto's, the two spirals meeting, spinning in opposite directions for a moment and then finding a common axis and spinning together, the sound of it the loudest thing that had happened in the yard all night and also, somehow, the quietest. I see you, Naruto said. I've got you. Arlen looked at him, and for one clear moment the ice was simply not there. No armor, no cold, no 10,000 years. Just a man's face, 32 years old, and the expression of someone who had just been given back a name. The Rasengan met the cold sphere and ended it. The collapse happened outward from the Night King's position like a wave. Not the shattering end that everyone had imagined, the dramatic cataclysm, it was quieter than that, which made it stranger to witness. The Night King's body began to come apart from the center outward, the way a fire burns from the inside of the wood, and the cold blue light that had powered everything fed back into the collapse and did not scatter but was consumed, taken in as fuel for the ending itself. The White Walkers shattered first, from anywhere in the castle they were visible, on the walls, at the gates, in the field, each one gone in a single moment of blue light that extinguished cleanly. No debris, no remains, just the space where they had been. The whites followed. The army of the dead, hundreds of thousands strong, pressing against Winterfell's walls on every side, they fell. Not all at once, but in sequence, like something was moving through them, unhooking them from the force that had been running them, and each one that fell was just dead, just a person who had died before and was now simply dead again. No blue light in them. No animation. Just bodies in the snow. The sound of it was the sound of the fighting stopping. One section at a time, as the collapse moved outward, the impacts and screams and steel replaced by silence, and the silence moved south like the opposite of the dead army had moved north, swallowing the battle whole. On the eastern wall, Clay watched his section of dead simply fall down in a wave moving from north to south, and stood with his sword raised at nothing, and lowered it slowly. On the western approach, Tormund watched 3 Dothraki riders look around at the fallen dead surrounding them with the expressions of men whose situation had just changed faster than their understanding could keep up. He laughed. It came out raw and a little hysterical and he let it. In the inner yard, Ghost sat down. Jon Snow stood in the silence with Longclaw at his side and watched the last of the dead fall and felt the specific, precise quality of a grief he hadn't expected. Not sadness that it was over but sadness for the cost it had taken to get here, the lives, the time, the suffering, all of it landing in the quiet that followed with the full weight it had been denied during the noise. Sansa watched from the wall and did not cry. She breathed once, deeply, and then turned to the people nearest her and said, quietly, "Get the healers to the yard. All of them." Because that was what came next, and someone had to be first to understand what came next. Arya was on the wall above the inner yard. She had watched everything. The conversation she couldn't hear but could see entirely in the postures of the two figures. The sphere of cold light. The Rasengan meeting it. The Night King's face in the moment before the end, which she had watched very carefully, and had understood, and had filed away in the place she kept things that changed how she thought about something. She watched Naruto standing alone in the center of the inner yard where the Night King had been, the glow fading from his body, the quiet settling around him. She went down to the yard. He was standing completely still when she reached him, which was unusual enough that she didn't say anything for a moment. He was looking at the ground where the Night King had stood, where there was now nothing, no body, no ice, no mark, as though Arlen had never been there at all, which was in a way exactly right. "Are you hurt?" Arya asked. "No," he said. "Are you?" she paused, reassessing. How are you? He looked at her and his face was carrying something she recognized, not grief exactly, not the sharp painful kind. The other kind. The kind that came after something very large had been decided, when the tension of the undecided thing released and left a space that was relief and loss simultaneously. I'm okay, he said, and meant it, and also meant more than it. It was the right end. Was he? She stopped. She'd seen it, from the wall. She'd seen the expression on the Night King's face in the last moment. She asked the question she actually wanted answered, was there enough of him left? For it to matter. Naruto looked at her. Yeah, he said. There was. Arya nodded, and something settled in her that had been unsettled, some piece of her accounting that needed to be balanced in a specific way. Good, she said. Jon arrived a moment later, and then Davos, and then Tormund, who immediately grabbed Naruto by the shoulders with both hands and shook him once with enormous force and said something in the free folk language that Naruto didn't understand but that clearly communicated something enthusiastic and sincere. Naruto grinned. Daenerys came last. She walked to Naruto with her furs and her silver hair and her complicated eyes, and she looked at him for a moment, and then she looked at the sky where Valyrian had fallen, and then she looked at Drogon on the far side of the yard, alive and injured and being attended by her Dothraki. He's going to be all right, Naruto said. The wing. It'll heal. How do you know? She asked. Because I watched him land, Naruto said. He pulled the injured wing in before impact. He protected it. He knew what he was doing. Something in Daenerys's face was very carefully composed around something very not composed, and she held it together with the practiced ease of someone who had been keeping themselves together in public for a long time. Thank you, she said, and it cost her something to say it plainly like that, without architecture around it, and that cost was what made it real. He was magnificent, Naruto said, about Drogon, and let it also be about Valyrian, and let her know that he was letting it also be about Valyrian, and watched her receive that. Around them the yard was filling with people who were alive and understanding that they were alive, which was its own kind of loud, different from battle loud, warmer and more chaotic and entirely human. Naruto stood in the middle of it and felt the long night end. Not with triumph. With the quiet Melisandre had seen in her fires, the quiet of a room after someone stops crying, which was exactly right, which was perhaps the only right ending for a 10,000-year scream. He looked up at the sky. The cloud ceiling that had come with the dead army was already breaking apart, the iron gray dissolving at the edges, and in the gaps he could see stars. Actual stars, cold and clear and very far away. Kurama, he said inward. Still here, the fox said. Yeah. He watched the stars appear through the breaking clouds. Yeah. Chapter 6. The spiral that remains. The morning came pink and clean and entirely unprepared for what it found. Dawn after the long night had a quality that none of them had words for, not even Tyrion who had words for most things. It arrived the way dawn usually did, incrementally, reluctantly in winter, the light building from gray to rose to pale gold, but it felt different in the body. Like the light was heavier than it should be, more substantial, landing on skin with a warmth that was noticed in a way morning light usually wasn't. Several soldiers on the walls stood with their faces turned up toward it like they were drinking it, and nobody said anything about that because everyone understood. Naruto sat outside on the steps of the main keep with a bowl of something hot that was not ramen but had been produced by a kitchen working on very little sleep and a genuine attempt, and he ate it and watched the light come. Ghost was beside him. The dire wolf had been beside him since the yard, in the particular way Ghost had of deciding something was his responsibility and then simply being there, present and warm and entirely uncommenting. The yard itself was still being cleared. Bodies, the twice dead, the whites who had simply fallen and stayed fallen, were being moved and counted and accounted for, because Sansa had organized that with the same systematic efficiency she'd organized everything else, the work of understanding the cost begun before the cost was fully visible. Fires burned at the yard's edge, not for warmth, for the necessary work of the aftermath. It was a lot of bodies. Naruto ate his not ramen and watched the work and thought about Arlen, which he expected he would do for a long time. Not with grief, not with regret, he had made the right choice and he knew it, but with the particular sustained attention he gave to people he'd met briefly who had made him understand something large and important. Arlen had been waiting for someone to acknowledge him for 10,000 years. That was the real end of the long night. Not the Rasengan. Not the battle. The name, spoken aloud by someone who meant it. "You're doing the thing," Kurama said. "What thing?" "The thinking about it thing. The sitting with it thing." A pause. "It's not bad. You should sit with it." Another pause, shorter. "I'm sitting with it too, if that helps." It helped. Jon found him at the steps when the light was fully up, coming from the direction of the healer tents with blood on his sleeve that wasn't his and tiredness in his face that was the good kind, the tiredness of someone who had spent everything they had on something that was worth it. He looked at Naruto, at the not ramen, at Ghost. He sat down on the steps without being invited, which Naruto appreciated. "Numbers?" Naruto asked. "Still counting," Jon said. "Less than we feared." "More than," he stopped. "Recalibrated." "More than I can hold right now." "Yeah." They were quiet for a while. The morning light moved across the yard. Somewhere beyond the outer walls a horse called out and another answered and the sound was startlingly normal, startlingly alive. "He said something," Jon said. "At the end. I was too far away to hear it." Naruto looked at his bowl. "He said enough." "What does that mean?" "It means he was done," Naruto said. "It means 10,000 years of something nobody should have had to carry for 10,000 years was done, and he knew it was done, and that was enough." He paused. "He had a daughter. Before. I don't know her name. But I think at the end he was thinking about her name. The same way he was when they took him." Jon was very quiet. "He got that back," Naruto said. "Whatever comes after, wherever he went as himself. Not as the weapon. As Arlen." He finally looked at Jon. "That matters." Jon looked at him with those dark eyes that had their own version of too much seen. "You do that," he said. "You give people back to themselves." "I try," Naruto said. "It's not a small thing. It's the only thing, sometimes." Naruto set the empty bowl aside. "Arya told me you have a habit of not believing you're worth as much as you are." Jon blinked. "She said that?" "Words to that effect." Naruto looked at him. "You held the center for 2 hours in the dark with dead men coming from every direction and you never broke and your people never broke because you never broke. That's not nothing." "You held the eastern wall alone," Jon said. "I was never going to break," Naruto said. "That's a different thing. What you did is harder." He held Jon's gaze. "Courage when you're sure you're capable is ability. Courage when you don't know if you'll make it is," he searched. "That's the real thing." Jon looked away, not because he was dismissing it but because he was receiving it, which he apparently did sideways. "You sound like Davos." "Davos is very wise," Naruto said. "Davos is a smuggler who became a knight by accident. Those are often the wisest people." Naruto stood, stretched, looked at the sky. "Come on. Sansa's going to need both of us for whatever the next 3 hours look like." Jon stood. "You know what the next 3 hours look like. Political fallout, logistics, somebody crying in a corridor, and Tormund doing something that will need to be diplomatically addressed," Naruto said, and walked down the steps, and Jon followed, and Ghost followed Jon, and the morning opened up ahead of them full of everything that survived. Tormund had, in fact, done something that required diplomatic address. He had, in the immediate aftermath of the battle's end,
located a significant quantity of wine in a storeroom whose lock had not survived the night intact, organized 3 wildling clan leaders and 2 Dothraki bloodriders into a celebration that was technically happening inside the castle walls but was audible from outside them, and at some point in the early morning had announced to anyone in range that the boy with the spiral hand had killed death itself with a ball of golden fire, and the gods are dead and we are alive, and this deserves better wine than this. The diplomatic address required was mostly in the form of Naruto appearing at the storeroom door, confirming he was not dead, accepting a cup he did not drink because it was too early, and also whatever was in the cup smelled deeply unreasonable, and suggesting that the celebration be moved somewhere it would bother fewer people who were trying to count bodies and organize healers. Tormund moved it to the eastern yard, which was already cleared, and the celebration became something else, something that had people who had been fighting all night gradually finding their way to it, not wildlings only but northerners, unsullied soldiers, Dothraki riders, all of them in the same physical language of survival, passing cups and sitting on the cold ground and looking at each other with the specific expression that said we are here and we are alive and we know exactly what that cost. Naruto moved through it the way he moved through most things, without ceremony, talking to people, remembering names he'd heard once in passing, asking about injuries with the practical concern of someone who meant it and not as social lubricant. He found Clay from the eastern wall sitting with 3 of his men and crouched down, and they talked for a while about the eastern approach, about what had held and what had almost broken and what Clay's men had done to adapt that had saved a section of wall at a crucial moment. Clay's men listened to their leader being credited by the person they'd watched do what they'd watched him do on the eastern wall, and the expressions on their faces were uncomplicated and good. Missandei found Naruto in the yard mid-morning and walked beside him for a while with a cup of her own that she held but didn't drink, and they talked, switching languages 3 times in 10 minutes for the pleasure of it, testing the edges of what Naruto understood of the local tongue that he'd been absorbing through contact and context since he arrived. And Missandei's face did something open and delighted when he produced a grammatically correct if charmingly accented phrase in Old Valyrian. And she corrected his pronunciation twice and laughed when he got it right on the 3rd try. "Your facility for language is extraordinary," she said. "It's chakra," he said. "Something in the way it interacts with the seal, it speeds up acquisition. I can't read your script yet, but I understand spoken language at about 90% now." 90%, she said. "The missing 10 is mostly Tormund," he said. "His dialect is genuinely its own thing." She laughed again, and it was real, and the yard was cold and smelled of smoke, and they were both standing in the aftermath of something terrible, and this moment was still good, which was the nature of those moments. They existed alongside the terrible things, not after them. Daenerys called the council at noon. She looked rested, which Naruto suspected was a performance, but a good one. She had the quality of someone who had decided what face the day required and had put it on completely. Yora was at her right, quieter than usual, with something in his expression that Naruto recognized as the particular emotion of someone who had survived something they'd half decided they wouldn't and was recalibrating around the surprise of their own continued existence. Tyrion was at her left, and Tyrion looked genuinely tired and was not performing otherwise, which Naruto respected. Jon, Sansa, Davos, Naruto, and Arya completed the table. Sam was present in the corner with his books open, not as a council member but as Sam, which was a category of presence that nobody objected to. "Cersei," Daenerys said, and the word had the quality of a door being opened that had been held closed for a long time. "Cersei," Tyrion confirmed. The conversation that followed was the most politically complicated thing Naruto had sat in since the early days of the Alliance Councils in the Fourth Shinobi World War, which had featured 5 nation leaders, each with their own historical grievances and strategic priorities, trying to coordinate against a common enemy while also protecting their individual interests. He recognized the structure of it and let it unfold, listening more than contributing, watching the currents. Daenerys wanted to move south immediately. Her army, reduced but not broken. Drogon, injured but recovering faster than anyone had projected, which Naruto had predicted and which seemed to quietly unsettle Daenerys in a way she didn't fully examine. The Golden Company sitting at Casterly Rock. Cersei in King's Landing. Jon wanted to give the North time to bury its dead. Not indefinitely, he wasn't asking for weeks.
Days. A few days of breath before the next thing. Sansa aligned with Jon for the same reason she always aligned with Jon, not because she deferred to him but because she'd looked at the same information and come to the same conclusion through her own route. Tyrion proposed a middle path with the careful geometry of someone who was genuinely trying to find a shape that fit everyone's constraints. Naruto watched Daenerys through all of it. He watched the hunger in her, not the cruel kind. He'd stopped thinking of it as the cruel kind some time ago, but the deep kind, the kind that had been building since she was a child and had been given a reason to believe she deserved the world and then had the world systematically taken from her. He watched how it pulled against the other thing in her, the thing that had stood in the yard with Drogon's blood on her hands last night and said thank you simply and meant it. The two things were at war in her. They had been since before he'd met her. They would be for some time after. Daenerys, he said, when there was a natural opening. She looked at him. 3 days, he said. Give the North 3 days. In 3 days Drogon's wing will have enough strength for short-distance flight and your army will be fed and rested and the Northerners who are going to march south with you will have had the chance to say goodbye to their dead properly. He held her gaze. Cersei is not going anywhere. She doesn't know the long night is over yet. The ravens will reach her by tomorrow morning at the earliest. When she knows, she'll start fortifying. She'll also start panicking, because everything she planned around rests on the dead doing damage that didn't happen. He paused. A panicking Cersei is a different opponent from a secure one. 3 days changes that equation in your favor. Tyrion was already nodding. Not enthusiastically, measuredly, which was the nod that meant this is correct and I wish I'd said it first. Daenerys looked at the table for a moment. Then, 3 days. Jon exhaled. Sansa moved on immediately to logistics, which was her way of confirming an agreement. She treated finalized decisions as the new baseline and proceeded forward from them without ceremony, and everyone at the table had learned that this was the most efficient possible way to handle Sansa Stark's contribution to a war council. Under the table, Arya's foot briefly touched Naruto's boot, not accidentally, not romantically, just a quiet physical note that said well done in the language of people who didn't say things like that out loud. He pressed his boot back, briefly. He found Melisandre in the afternoon. She was in the northern section of the castle, in a small room with a narrow window that faced the direction the dead had come from, and the fire she'd lit was small and she was looking at it with the concentrated attention she brought to all fires but with a quality he hadn't seen in it before. Something settled, something that had stopped asking questions it had been asking for a very long time. What do you see? He asked. She looked up. Nothing, she said. He waited. For the first time in years, she said, the fire shows me nothing. No visions. No urgency. No figures in the flame. She looked back at it. It's just fire. It's restful, she said. Yes. It's the most restful thing I've experienced in longer than I can account for. She was quiet for a moment. I think my God is done with me. Done with you how? I think I was a tool, she said, and said it without bitterness or self-pity, just the flat observation of someone examining a mechanism. I was brought here, kept alive beyond my natural years, sent in the directions I was sent, to Jon Snow, to Stannis, north, because the Lord of Light needed certain events to happen in certain sequences. She paused. And now they have. And the fire has nothing left to show me. She looked at Naruto. What do I do with that? What do you want to do? He asked. She seemed genuinely surprised by the question, not at the question itself but at being the person asked it. As though she'd spent so long operating inside someone else's will that the concept of her own wants had become theoretical. I want to help, she said slowly, excavating the answer from somewhere it had been buried under theology and purpose. Not because a God told me to. Not to redeem what I've done. I don't think redemption works that way. I don't think you can buy your way out of the past with enough good deeds. She looked at the fire. I just want to help. Concretely. People who are in front of me. Without the architecture of prophecy around it. That's the cleanest version of help there is, Naruto said. Is it enough? After, yes, he said, and didn't let her finish the sentence, not because the end of it wasn't real but because she'd been living in the end of that sentence for long enough. Yes. It's enough. Start there. She looked at him for a long time, and he let her look, and then she looked back at the fire and he left her to it. The 3 days moved with a different rhythm than any 3 days Winterfell had known for months. The burying happened, and it was hard, and it was real, and Sansa organized it with the same systematic clarity she brought to everything while also being present at it in a way that people noticed. She was there, physically, standing in the wind with her red hair loose and her hands folded and her face bearing witness to every interment. Jon was there too, and Arya, and the Stark name was present in full for the dead of the North, which mattered in ways that were old and important. Naruto was there for the wildling dead, because Tormund asked him and because the wildlings had fought on the eastern wall beside him and he owed them that much, and he stood in the cold and understood almost none of the free folk ceremony being performed but understood all of its weight and let himself feel it. Drogon healed faster than anyone expected except Naruto, who checked the wing on the second morning with the same careful, practical attention he gave to healing assessments and told Daenerys the tissue was reknitting correctly and the dragon would have full range of motion within the week. Daenerys watched him run his hands along the injured wing with chakra active. Drogon permitted this with the attitude of an animal that had decided Naruto was acceptable, which was its own kind of extraordinary, and said nothing, but watched everything. You know medicine, she said. Field medicine, he said. I learned most of it because I kept getting hurt and people kept having to fix me and I got tired of being fixed by other people. That's an unusual motivator for becoming a healer. Self-reliance, he said, with a half-grin. Also I healed faster than most people and needed to understand why so I could use it better. He ran his hand along the membrane of the wing, feeling the chakra response in the tissue. He'll be ready in 5 days instead of 7. Push him earlier and you risk re-injury that'll take twice as long. 5 days is 2 days after we leave, she said. Then he flies the second day and rests on the first. He looked at her. He'll tell you when he's ready. Don't make him go before he tells you. He doesn't speak, she said. He speaks, Naruto said. You just have to listen differently. Daenerys looked at Drogon's eye, the great amber eye, alive and warm and full of something that was not human intelligence but was not less than it either, and then back at Naruto. You are the strangest person I have ever met, she said. I get that a lot too, he said. On the second evening, Arya found him at the same place on the eastern wall where they'd first sat together, legs over the edge, looking east. She came and sat beside him with a container of something warm that turned out to be actual decent tea, which she handed to him without ceremony. Where do you go? She asked. When this is over. He held the tea. I don't know, he said honestly. Kurama is working on it. The rift that brought me here, it was an act of chakra, a huge one, under extreme stress. Recreating it deliberately is a different problem. Could you not recreate it? Maybe, he said. Maybe this is where I am now. He looked at the eastern dark, which was just ordinary dark now, cold and deep and entirely without the pressing weight that had lived in it for weeks. I'm not panicking about it. There are worse places to be. Arya was quiet for a moment. Worse people to be stuck with. Much worse, he agreed. You'd be good here, she said, and the casualness was slightly effortful, the tone of someone making a point while pretending they're just observing. The North could use someone like you. After the war in the South is done, there's going to be a lot of rebuilding. A lot of things that need, she paused. Someone who doesn't walk away from things. I don't walk away from things, he confirmed. I know. She pulled her knees up slightly. I'm not saying stay. I'm saying you'd be good here. If you stayed. He looked at her profile in the dim light. Would you stay? She was very quiet for a long time. I don't know, she said finally. I've been heading somewhere for a long time. I don't know if Winterfell is still the direction or if it's just a place I needed to come back to. She paused. There's a west. No one knows what's west of Westeros. See, Naruto said. Everyone says see. But Arya Stark wants to know for certain. A beat. Maybe I find out what's west of Westeros and you find your way back to your land of fire and the world is just, she gestured vaguely. Larger than anyone thought. It already is, he said. She turned and looked at him and something in her expression was open in the way it was occasionally open, the unself-conscious version of her that appeared in the spaces between her careful self-management. Will you remember us? She asked. If you go back. Will Westeros be a story you tell? Westeros will be the story I tell every person who ever doubts that people can surprise you, he said. Because every person I met here surprised me. He paused. Some of them pleasantly. Some of them with the sheer level of political complexity they could pack into a single conversation. Arya almost smiled. Sansa. Sansa is extraordinary, he said, with complete sincerity. She builds things while the world is falling down. Do you know how rare that is? Something soft moved through Arya's expression. I know, she said quietly. I know it now better than I used to. They sat for a while longer and then the cold made it reasonable to go inside and they went inside, and it was the last uncomplicated evening before the host moved south, and it was good. The morning of departure was organized chaos of the particular kind that Naruto had learned to navigate in his own world, too many people, too many pieces of equipment, too many animals, too many last conversations being had in doorways that were actively needed for logistical passage. He moved through it helping where helping was useful and staying out of the way where it wasn't. He found Sam at the edge of the yard with a cart that was mostly books and a smaller quantity of practical supplies, which was exactly the correct Sam-Tarly ratio. You're coming south, Naruto said. Someone has to write it down, Sam said. He looked at his cart. All of it. The Night King's real history, what he actually was, what was done to him. The real account of the long night. He looked at Naruto. You, specifically. What you are, where you came from. How it ended. He paused. People should know it ended with someone saying a dead man's name. Not just with a fight. Naruto thought about this. You'll need the whole thing, he said. From the beginning. The children of the forest, what they did. Arlen. I know, Sam said. I'll need your account. Everything you knew going into the final confrontation. He pulled out a journal. Can we talk on the road? Yeah, Naruto said. On the road. Sam wrote the name Arlen at the top of a fresh page and looked at it for a moment with the particular reverence of a man who understood the weight of preserved names. Jon found him just before the column moved out. They stood near the main gate in the organized noise of departure, horses and boots and command voices, and Jon had his armor on and Longclaw at his hip and the particular look of a man walking toward one more thing that needed to be faced. Thank you, Jon said. Naruto looked at him. You don't need to, not for the battle, Jon said. Not for the Night King. He held Naruto's gaze. For the conversation on the ramparts. The first night. When you said, he paused, and something moved through his expression. When you said coming back and being exactly yourself again was the strangest part. Naruto remembered. I've been trying to figure out if coming back meant I was supposed to be different, Jon said. Better. Changed. If dying and coming back meant something was supposed to be different about me. He exhaled. You made me think maybe it just meant I was still here. Still me. And that was the point. That's the point, Naruto said. Jon Snow is enough, Jon said, as though testing the sentence, feeling its weight. Jon Snow is more than enough, Naruto said. Ask anyone who stood in that yard last night. Jon was quiet for a moment, and then he did something that surprised Naruto, he put out his hand. Not as a formal gesture, not with ceremony, just a hand extended with the directness of someone who had decided to mean the thing they were doing. Naruto took it, and they gripped, and in the grip was everything that 2 weeks in the same castle under the same impossible circumstances could build between two people who had died and come back and refused to stop being themselves. "If you find your way home," Jon said. "I'll find my way home," Naruto said. "Then whenever that is," Jon paused. "I'm glad you were here first." "Me too," Naruto said. "Take care of the North." "The North takes care of itself," Jon said, with the ghost of a smile. "I just argue with it occasionally." He released Naruto's hand and moved to his horse, and the column began to form and Winterfell's main gate opened onto the road south. They went south. Not all of them, the northern lords and their forces largely stayed to begin the work of rebuilding, which was its own war of different materials. Sansa stayed. Arya, who Naruto had half expected to ride south with Daenerys's column, stayed at Winterfell until the last horse was through the gate and then walked back inside without looking back, which was Arya's way of doing everything. Naruto watched them go from the wall. He stayed at Winterfell. Not because he'd been asked to, he could have ridden south, could have involved himself in whatever came next in King's Landing, and a part of him was curious. But the thing he'd said to Arya was true, he didn't know how to get home yet, and Winterfell was where his thread into this world was anchored, and if Kurama was right, if the rift that had brought him here could be recreated, it would be from here. More than that, Winterfell was where the work was. The rebuilding was real and immediate and needed people who were good with their hands and their presence, and Naruto was both. So he stayed. The weeks that followed were different from everything that had come before, which was restful in the way that genuinely new things are restful. They required full attention and left no space for the weight of the past. He helped rebuild the eastern wall section that had taken the most damage, working alongside the Winterfell masons with chakra-enhanced efficiency that made the head mason deeply suspicious for 3 days before transitioning to delighted. He ran training sessions with the soldiers who remained, passing on movement principles, evasion patterns, the basics of reading an opponent's body before they committed to a direction. He taught Arya to project killing intent deliberately and consciously, and the first time she did it with full control, 3 grown soldiers stepped back without meaning to and then looked embarrassed and then looked at each other as though checking if the others had felt it too. She didn't smile. She filed it. Then, when everyone else had moved on, she let herself smile, small and private, facing the wall. He wrote letters. Or had Sam write letters before Sam left, long accounts that he dictated, addressed to the people of Konoha, to Sakura and Kakashi and Sasuke, letters he had no way to send but that needed to be written anyway, because some communications are for the writer as much as the recipient. He kept them folded in the inside pocket of his jacket. He talked to Kurama constantly, which had become if anything more the case after the long night rather than less. With the external crisis resolved, the internal conversation had more room to breathe, and Kurama had opinions about Westeros's political structure, its agriculture, its weather, its architectural choices, and its cuisine in roughly equal measure. "The soup is better than it should be for a cold climate," Kurama said one evening. "Don't tell me you like the soup." "I'm not telling you I like the soup. I'm making an objective assessment." "You like the soup." A very long pause. "The broth has good depth." Naruto laughed out loud in the middle of the empty great hall and the sound echoed, and it was good. The rift opened on a night in late winter, 6 weeks after the long night. It was not announced. It was not preceded by any particular sign except that Kurama had been building energy carefully and quietly for 2 weeks, accumulating it the way you accumulate something precious in small amounts over a long time, and that evening he said, "I think tonight," and Naruto had gone to the south field, the same south field, and stood in the snow and waited. Sansa knew. He'd told her the previous day with the directness he gave everything, and she had received it with the directness she gave everything. And they had talked for an hour about things that mattered, about what he'd told her of his own world, about what she'd built here and what she intended to build, about her brothers, her sister, about being a Stark in a world that had tried repeatedly to use that name as a wound. She'd given him a letter at the end of it. Sealed, addressed to no one, because there was no one to address it to in a world that didn't exist in any atlas. He'd taken it with both hands. "What should I tell people?" she asked. "About you. When they ask, tell them there was a boy from the land of fire who showed up unannounced and ate all our food," he said. She didn't quite smile. And he stayed as long as he was needed," he said. "And then he went home." She nodded once, precise and complete, the way she finalized things. "Go home, Naruto," she said. "Arya was in the field when he got there." Of course she was. She was standing at the edge of the south field with her arms crossed against the cold, in her traveling clothes, which he registered but didn't comment on because she had her own journey and he had his, and they were going in different directions and both of them understood that. "I wasn't going to come," she said. "I thought it would be easier to just," she stopped. "I don't do goodbyes." "I know," he said. "I'm not doing one now," she said. "I'm just here." "I know," he said. She uncrossed her arms. "There's something west of Westeros," she said, with absolute certainty. "I'm going to find out what it is." "I know that too," he said. "Good." She looked at him with those gray eyes that had seen too much and kept going anyway. "Tell your fox I said nothing. I don't have anything to say to a 10,000-year-old fox." "She can say that," Kurama said, with something in his voice that might have been affection. "It's accurate." "He says he respects the choice," Naruto said. Arya almost smiled, and then did, and then it was gone, and she turned and walked back toward the castle without looking back because she never looked back, and Naruto watched her go until the gate closed behind her. He stood alone in the south field. The same field. 30 feet from where the crater had been, though the crater itself was long filled in, the ground settled, no visible record of the night he'd arrived. He breathed. "Ready?" Kurama asked. "Yeah." He put his hand in his pocket and touched the letters. "Yeah, I'm ready." "It's going to be loud," Kurama said. "The rift opening. Similar to the one that brought you here." "I know. The Konoha end is going to be, I'm not sure exactly where we land." "Has that ever stopped us?" A pause. "No," Kurama said, and the warmth in it was the warmth of something very old and very sure. "No, it hasn't." The energy built from the center outward, Kurama's vast chakra working with Naruto's own the way they'd learned to work together over years of shared existence, not one overwhelming the other, not the seal's constraint limiting the power but directing it, the way a riverbank directs water not by fighting it but by being present and shaped correctly. The gold light came up from the ground around Naruto's feet, the spiral mark on his hand blazing, the air compressing and then releasing around him in a wave that flattened the snow in a perfect circle. The tear in the air opened above him the way the original one had opened from the other side, a column of gold and blue-white punching upward through the cloud ceiling, sustained and loud, and every wolf in Winterfell lifted its head simultaneously, and every torch on the outer walls guttered, and in the main keep Sansa Stark looked up from her desk with no expression on her face except the small, precise acknowledgement of something concluded. Naruto looked up at the light. Then he looked north, once, in the direction the long night had come from, in the direction of the place where a man named Arlen had stood at the center of 10,000 years of pain and had finally been given his name back and had said enough. He looked at the spiral mark on his hand, his clan symbol, his father's legacy, home and protection and the place you return to, and it burned warm and gold in the light, and he pressed it briefly to his chest, the way he'd done 10,000 times in the battles of his own world, the way it meant I've got you, hold on, you're not alone. For Arlen. For all of it. Then he looked up at the tear in the sky and let the chakra take him. He landed in Konoha in a crater of scorched earth and shocked civilians, 30 feet from the ramen stand where he'd eaten more meals than he could count, and the first sound he heard was Kakashi's voice saying, "I'm going to ask you to explain this, but I want you to know I've already started writing the mission report in my head and I've made several assumptions I'm committed to." Naruto sat up from the crater. The spiral mark on his hand was quiet, warm, gold. He looked at the ramen stand. He looked at the familiar sky, the familiar buildings, the familiar smell of his world, which smelled like pine and rain and chakra and home. He started crying, which surprised him, and then it didn't, because that was fine, that was allowed, that was the correct response to being home after being somewhere else that had needed you and had let you go. Ramen, he said to Kakashi. First. And then I'll explain everything. Kakashi looked at the crater and at Naruto and at the tear in the sky that was already closing. Ramen, he agreed. Then everything. In the great library at Winterfell, in the completed manuscript of Samuel Tarly's account of the long night, the last entry of the first chapter reads, "He arrived without warning in a pillar of light, in orange clothes that had no business in a northern winter, and the first thing he asked about was a food that no one in Westeros had ever heard of. He stayed 6 weeks. He ended a 10,000-year war by giving a dead man back his name. He left the way he came." I have tried to explain Naruto Uzumaki to everyone who has read this account and found the explanation inadequate, because the explanation of a person is never the person. What I can tell you is this: he was from somewhere else, and he was homesick, and he never once let either of those things stop him from being fully present where he was. Arya Stark, when asked what she remembered most about him, said, "He looked at everyone like they were worth looking at. Even the dead ones." I think that's the whole of it.